The rain fell in angry sheets, pummeling the muddy ground and drowning out all sound, but the desperate gasps of the woman running through the darkness. Harriet Foster's boots slipped in the mud as she clutched a small package to her chest, her soaked dress clinging to her body like a second skin. The distant thunder of hoofbeats grew louder behind her, punctuated by shouts that carried on the wind. "There she is. Don't let her get away." Her lungs burned as she pushed forward each breath, a battle against the stitch in her side. She hadn't slept in 2 days, hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. But she couldn't stop. Not now. Her foot caught on an exposed root, sending her sprawling face first into the mud. The package flew from her grasp, landing several feet away. The brown paper wrapping tore as it hit the ground, revealing a gleam of gold that caught what little moonlight broke through the storm clouds. A pocket watch, ornate and valuable with intricate engravings that spoke of craftsmanship and wealth. Harriet scrambled toward it, mud coating her hands and face as she snatched it back. For a moment, she stared at the watch, its golden face seeming to stare back at her. So small a thing to cost a man's life. Her brother's life. "I'll return you to your rightful owner," she whispered, tucking the watch into her bodice close to her heart. "I swear it, Robert. I'll make this right." The voices grew closer. Harriet pulled herself to her feet and ran again, disappearing into the tree line just as lantern light swept over the spot where she had fallen. 1 week later, Creswell, Wyoming Territory, 1885. Dust swirled in lazy eddies along the main street of Creswell, a frontier town clinging to existence on the edge of the Wyoming prairie. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, baking the wooden buildings and causing the air to shimmer above the dirt road. A stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the town's only hotel, wheels creaking in protest. The few townsfolk milling about paused to observe the newcomer who stepped down from the coach. She wore a simple blue dress, modest but clean, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun at the nape of her neck. She carried only one small valise clutched tightly in a hand that bore the calluses of someone accustomed to hard work. She called herself Vivian Gray now. The name felt strange on her tongue but necessary. She had rehearsed it during the long journey west, whispering it to herself in the darkness of the stagecoach, as the landscape changed from the lush greenery of the east to the sprawling plains and rugged mountains of Wyoming. "First time in Creswell, miss?" The stagecoach driver handed down her valise, his weathered face creased with curiosity. "Yes," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "I'm hoping to find work." The driver chuckled. "Not much call for fancy ladies here. What kind of work you looking for?" "I cook," she said simply. "I'm told there's always need for good food, even in the smallest towns." "That there is." He nodded toward the building across the street with a swinging sign that read Simmons General Store. "Martha over there might know who's hiring. She knows everyone's business in these parts." Vivian nodded her thanks and crossed the dusty street, conscious of the eyes that followed her. A new face was always cause for speculation in small towns. She'd been warned about that by the woman who'd shared her coach from Cheyenne. "Folks out there don't get many visitors," the woman had said, eyeing Vivian's city clothes. "They'll want to know your business right quick. Best have a story ready." And Vivian did have a story. Not entirely false, but not the whole truth either. Enough to explain her presence without revealing the weight of the gold pocket watch hidden in the secret pocket she'd sewn into her petticoat. The bell above the door jangled as she entered the general store. The scent of coffee leather and dried goods greeted her, along with the curious gaze of a plump woman arranging jars of preserves on a shelf. "Well, hello there," the woman said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Can I help you, dear?" "I hope so," Vivian replied. "I'm looking for work as a cook. The stagecoach driver suggested you might know of opportunities. The woman, Martha Simmons, according to the embroidery on her apron, looked Vivian up and down with shrewd eyes. Cook, you say, where would you work before? The Henderson House in St. Louis. A safe answer. The Henderson House had burned down last winter, taking any employment records with it. Martha's expression softened slightly. A proper establishment, then. Well, there's the hotel restaurant, but they've got old Pete cooking there, and though his food's barely edible, Mr. Holloway won't turn him out. She tapped a finger against her chin. There's always the Thornhill place. Something in her tone made Vivian look up sharply. Thornhill? Martha nodded, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Isaiah Thornhill's ranch about 3 miles east of town. Big place. Been in his family for generations. He's looking for a cook, though I should warn you, no one seems to last there long. Why not? Martha leaned in closer. He's difficult. Lost his wife Emma 3 years back. Tragic business. Left him alone with their little girl. He's not an unkind man, mind you, just— She searched for the right word. Cold, like something inside him froze when Emma died. Vivian absorbed this information, keeping her expression neutral, despite the quickening of her pulse. Thornhill, the name from Robert's final letter. She'd found them. I'm not afraid of difficult, she said quietly. How would I apply for the position? Martha seemed surprised by her interest after the warning. You can take the East Road out of town. Can't miss the place, big white house with a red barn. Though, if you've a mind to try, I'd go sooner rather than later. Storm's coming in tonight. Vivian thanked her and purchased a few necessities, a bar of soap, some hairpins, and a small loaf of bread for the journey. As she paid, she asked casually, This Mr. Thornhill, what else can you tell me about him? Martha seemed all too happy to oblige. Isaiah, mid-30s, I'd say. Handsome enough if he'd smile once in a blue moon. Was an army doctor during the war. Got those skills from his pa, old Doc Thornhill. Good with horses and cattle. Keeps to himself mostly. And his daughter, Charlotte, sweet child, though she's gone a bit wild since her mama passed. 7 years old now, I believe. Martha sighed. Shame about Emma. Loveliest woman you'd ever meet. Had a way with plants. Her herb garden was the envy of every woman in the county. Vivian nodded, committing these details to memory. Thank you for your help, Mrs. Simmons. Just Martha, dear. And if things don't work out at the Thornhill place, you come back and see me. My sister runs the boarding house, and she might find a place for you. Outside, Vivian paused on the boardwalk, her valise heavy in her hand, despite its meager contents. The weight she carried wasn't in her luggage, but in her purpose. She glanced toward the east, where dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, promising the storm Martha had mentioned. She had come too far to delay now. With determined steps, she began walking toward the East Road, toward the Thornhill Ranch, toward the reason she had traveled hundreds of miles with nothing but a dead man's pocket watch and a promise to clear his name. The Thornhill Ranch materialized out of the prairie like something from another time. A grand 2-story house, painted white, with a wraparound porch, and tall windows that reflected the approaching storm clouds. Behind it stood a large red barn and several outbuildings, all surrounded by split-rail fences that extended into grazing lands as far as the eye could see. It spoke of prosperity, of generations of work and care. It spoke of permanence in a way that made Vivian's transient existence of the past months feel all the more tenuous. She paused at the front gate, her heart hammering against her ribs. The pocket watch seemed to burn against her skin, where it lay hidden. This was the home of Emma Thornhill, the woman whose death had led to her brother's hanging. These were the people whose lives had been shattered, by the same tragedy that had destroyed her own family. What if they recognized her? The name Foster had been in all the newspapers during the trial. But no, she looked different now. Her once auburn hair was dyed a darker brown, and the past months of grief and hard travel had hollowed her cheeks and hardened her eyes. She was no longer the sheltered young woman from the papers. She was Vivian Gray now. Cook, traveler, seeker of truth. With a deep breath, she pushed open the gate and walked up the path to the front door. Before she could knock, the door swung open. The man who stood there seemed hewn from the same hardwood as the house itself. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that might have been handsome if not for the stern set of his jaw and the shadows beneath his eyes. His hair was dark with threads of premature silver at the temples, and his clothing was simple but well-made, the garb of a working rancher rather than an idle landowner. But it was his eyes that caught Vivian's attention. Gray as the coming storm and just as turbulent. Eyes that had seen too much suffering to view the world with anything but caution. Isaiah Thornhill. He regarded her with a mixture of surprise and wariness. "Can I help you, miss?" Vivian straightened her spine, willing her voice not to waver. "Mr. Thornhill, my name is Vivian Gray. I heard in town that you're in need of a cook." His expression didn't change, but his gaze traveled over her, assessing. She noticed then the scars on his hands, old marks of someone accustomed to hard work and danger. The hands of a soldier, a healer. "Who told you that?" he asked, his voice deep and measured. "Mrs. Simmons at the general store." He seemed unsurprised. News travels fast in Creswell. He didn't invite her in, didn't offer any hospitality to the woman who had clearly walked the 3 miles from town. Previous cook left 2 weeks ago, didn't give notice. Vivian waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. "I have experience," she offered into the silence. "I worked at the Henderson House in St. Louis for 3 years. A flicker of something interest perhaps crossed his face. Then he asked the only question that seemed to matter to him. "Can you cook for a child who doesn't eat much of anything?" The question caught her off guard. She had expected inquiries about her references, her background. Not this simple, vulnerable query from a father concerned for his daughter. "Yes," she answered honestly. "My mother taught me that even the pickiest child can be tempted by the right dish. It's about finding what calls to them." For a moment she thought she saw his expression soften, but it might have been a trick of the fading light as the storm clouds gathered overhead. A distant rumble of thunder punctuated the silence between them. "Kitchen's around back," he said, finally stepping aside. "I'll show you." It wasn't quite an offer of employment, but it was an invitation inside. Vivian followed him through the house, noting the quality of the furnishings, not ostentatious, but solid and well-crafted. The home of a family with roots and means. Yet there was a stillness to the place, an absence. Though clean and orderly, it lacked the small touches that made a house feel lived in. No books left open on side tables, no discarded shawls or children's toys. It felt like a home that was being maintained rather than truly inhabited. The kitchen, when they reached it, was spacious and well-equipped, with a large cast-iron stove, ample countertops, and a view of the herb garden through a window above the sink. Like the rest of the house, it was meticulously clean, but oddly impersonal, as though its true owner had stepped away only momentarily. Isaiah Thornhill stood in the doorway watching as Vivian took in her surroundings. "Previous cook had her quarters through there," he said, nodding toward a door at the far end of the kitchen. "Room and board are part of the wages. You'd take your meals with Charlotte, my daughter. I usually eat later." Vivian nodded, understanding the unspoken message. He kept himself separate, even at mealtimes. "When would you want me to start?" she asked, setting her valise down beside the large oak table that dominated the center of the room. "Now," he said simply. "If you're staying, Charlotte will be in from her lessons soon. She'll be hungry." No discussion of wages, of duties, of expectations, just the immediate need of a child who would be hungry. It told Vivian more about the man than a lengthy interview might have. "I'll need to know what she likes," Vivian said, already rolling up her sleeves. "And what you keep in stock." He gestured toward a large pantry. "Help yourself to whatever you find. As for what she likes," a shadow crossed his face. "That's the problem. She doesn't seem to like much of anything these days." With that cryptic statement, he turned to leave, pausing only to add, "Storm's coming. Might lose power. Lanterns are in the cupboard by the back door." And then he was gone, leaving Vivian alone in the kitchen that would become her domain if she succeeded where others had apparently failed. The sound of his footsteps faded, and Vivian allowed herself a moment to breathe, to absorb the reality of where she stood, in the home of the Thornhills. One step closer to the truth she sought. The kitchen fell silent around her. Dust motes danced in the waning sunlight that filtered through the window. Outside, the first tentative drops of rain began to tap against the glass. Vivian moved to the sink, letting her fingers trail along the worn wooden countertop. This is where she had stood. Emma Thornhill, the woman whose death had set everything in motion. She would have prepared meals here, washed dishes in this sink, looked out at her herb garden as she worked. Vivian's gaze was drawn to a knife block on the counter. One of the knives had a slightly different handle than the others. She pulled it out, carefully examining it. On the wooden handle, 2 letters were carved in a delicate script, E.T. Emma Thornhill. Vivian ran her thumb over the initials, feeling a strange connection to the woman she had never met. The woman whose death had led to her brother's hanging. The woman whose husband and child now lived like ghosts in their own home. "I'll find out what happened to you," she whispered the promise as much to Emma as to her brother. "And I'll make it right." The moment passed, and practicality reasserted itself. There was a meal to prepare for a hungry child. Vivian explored the pantry, finding it well stocked with staples: flour, sugar, dried beans, preserves. The cold box contained milk, butter, and eggs. In a root cellar, accessed through a trapdoor in the pantry floor, she discovered potatoes, carrots, onions, and other vegetables. She decided on a simple but hearty beef stew with rosemary, her mother's recipe. Something comforting on a stormy evening with fresh bread, if there was time to bake it. As she worked, the familiar motions of chopping, searing, and stirring calmed her racing thoughts. Cooking had always been her refuge, even in the darkest days after Robert's arrest and execution. In the chaos of a kitchen, there was order, predictability. A recipe followed faithfully would yield the expected results, unlike life, which seemed to delight in unexpected cruelties. The storm arrived in earnest as she set the stew to simmer. Rain lashed against the windows and thunder rumbled overhead. The kitchen grew dim as the daylight faded, and Vivian lit the oil lamps, casting the room in a warm, golden glow. She was just sliding a pan of biscuits into the oven when she heard the front door open and close, followed by the sound of boots being removed in the entryway. A child's voice called out, "Pa, are you home?" There was a low, indistinct response from Isaiah. Then light footsteps approached the kitchen. Vivian straightened, smoothing her apron as she prepared to meet Charlotte Thornhill for the first time. The girl who appeared in the doorway was small for 7, with a mass of dark curls pulled back in a ribbon that was coming undone. She had her father's storm-gray eyes, but hers were wide with curiosity rather than guarded. She wore a simple blue dress with muddy hems suggesting an afternoon spent outdoors despite the approaching weather. She stopped short at the sight of Vivian, her expression shifting from curiosity to wariness. "Hello," Vivian said gently. "You must be Charlotte. I'm Vivian." The girl didn't answer, just stared at her with those assessing gray eyes. Isaiah appeared behind her, his hand coming to rest on her shoulder. "Miss Gray is our new cook," he explained to his daughter. "She's made supper for you." Charlotte's gaze darted from her father to Vivian, then to the pot simmering on the stove. "What is it?" she asked, her voice small but not shy cautious. "Beef stew with rosemary," Vivian answered. "And biscuits in the oven. They'll be ready in about 15 minutes. The girl's nose wrinkled slightly. "I don't like stew." Isaiah's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on his daughter's shoulder. "Charlotte," he said quietly, a note of warning in his voice. Vivian kept her expression neutral. "That's all right. Not everyone does. Would you like to taste it before you decide? My mother always said that trying new things is an adventure for your tongue." It was a silly thing to say, but it had the desired effect. A flicker of a smile touched Charlotte's lips before she suppressed it. "That's a baby thing to say." "Maybe," Vivian conceded, "but my mother was very wise about food." Charlotte seemed to consider this. "I'll try it," she said finally with the grave dignity of someone conferring a great favor. "But I won't promise to like it." "That's fair," Vivian agreed. She glanced at Isaiah, whose expression had softened just a fraction as he watched the exchange. Their eyes met briefly, and she thought she saw a glimmer of gratitude before his customary reserve reasserted itself. "I'll be in my study," he said to no one in particular. "Call if you need anything." He disappeared down the hallway, leaving Vivian alone with Charlotte. The girl climbed onto a chair at the kitchen table, watching as Vivian moved about the kitchen setting places for dinner. "Where's your family?" Charlotte asked abruptly. The question caught Vivian off guard. "Why do you ask?" Charlotte shrugged. "People who come to work far away usually don't have families. Or they do, but they're bad families." The perceptiveness of the observation from one so young was startling. Vivian considered how to answer, how much truth to offer. "I had a family," she said carefully. "My parents died when I was younger. And I had a brother, but he's gone now too." "Like my mama," Charlotte said matter-of-factly. "She's gone," Vivian nodded, not trusting herself to speak. This was Emma's daughter, the child left behind when tragedy struck. "Pa says she's in heaven," Charlotte continued, swinging her legs beneath the table. "But sometimes I think she's still here, in the house." A chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside ran down Vivian's spine. "What makes you say that?" Charlotte leaned forward conspiratorially. "I hear her sometimes, at night, and things move. The last cook, Miss Jenkins, she left because she said the house was haunted." A small, mischievous smile played at the corners of the girl's mouth. "But it wasn't ghosts that scared her away. It was spiders." "Oh, spiders!" Vivian repeated, confused. Charlotte nodded, her smile widening. "I put them in her bed, big ones from the barn. She screamed so loud Pa came running with his gun." Vivian stared at the girl, momentarily speechless. Then, despite herself, she laughed. "That was very naughty of you." Charlotte didn't seem abashed. "She wanted to be my new mama. I heard her talking to Mrs. Simmons in town. She said Pa needed a wife, and she was going to make him see it." The girl's expression darkened. "But I don't want a new mama. I still have one." The revelation settled over Vivian like a weight. So that was why cooks didn't last at the Thornhill Ranch. not because of Isaiah's coldness, but because of a child's determination to keep her mother's memory, and perhaps her place, intact. "I'm not here to be anyone's mother, Charlotte," Vivian said gently. "Just to cook." The girl studied her face, searching for truth or deception. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her because she nodded once decisively. "Good, because I'd put spiders in your bed, too." The timer Vivian had set chimed, signaling that the biscuits were done. As she removed them from the oven, filling the kitchen with their warm, buttery aroma, she wondered what she had gotten herself into. The Thornhill household was more complicated than she had anticipated, with currents of grief and secrets running beneath the surface. But she was here now, one step closer to the truth about Emma Thornhill's death and her brother's innocence. Whatever obstacles lay in her path, be they a closed-off widower, a fiercely protective child, or even spiders in her bed, she would face them. For Robert, for justice, and perhaps, in some small way, for the ghost of Emma Thornhill, whose absence seemed to fill every corner of this house. Dinner with Charlotte proved to be an unexpectedly pleasant affair. Despite her initial reluctance, the girl ate 2 full bowls of stew and 3 biscuits, declaring with some surprise that it was actually good. She chatted intermittently, offering snippets of information about her life, her pony named Sugar, her lessons with Miss Abernathy, in town 3 days a week, her collection of interesting rocks displayed on her windowsill. Isaiah did not join them. Vivian prepared a tray for him and delivered it to his study, where he sat behind a large desk covered in ledgers and papers. The room smelled of leather and pipe tobacco, with bookshelves lining the walls, and a single photograph on the desk, a woman with Charlotte's curls and a gentle smile. "Emma." "Thank you," he said when she set down the tray, the words formal but not unkind. Charlotte seemed to enjoy her meal. "She did," Vivian confirmed. "She has quite an appetite for someone who doesn't like to eat." A flicker of a smile so brief she might have imagined it crossed his face. "She's selective, but apparently your cooking meets her standards." It wasn't exactly high praise, but Vivian sensed it was as close to approval as Isaiah Thornhill came these days. "Is there anything specific you'd like me to prepare tomorrow?" He shook his head. "Whatever you think best. We usually have a larger breakfast. Charlotte needs something substantial before her lessons." Vivian nodded. "I'll see to it." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her at the door. "Miss Gray?" She looked back. "Yes, the storm." He gestured toward the window where rain was still lashing against the glass. "Sometimes the creek at the east end of the property floods. If you hear the warning bell, it means to move to higher ground. The ranch hands know what to do." The concern, practical though it was, surprised her. "Thank you for the warning." He nodded once, already turning his attention back to his work. Dismissed, Vivian returned to the kitchen, where she found Charlotte still at the table, drawing on a piece of paper with colored pencils. "What are you drawing?" Vivian asked, beginning to clear the dishes. Charlotte held up the paper. It showed 3 stick figures, a tall one with dark hair, a small one with curly hair, and a medium-sized one with yellow hair. "That's Pa, that's me, and that's Mama," she explained, pointing to each figure. She had yellow hair. Vivian's heart tightened. "It's lovely," she said softly. Charlotte studied her artwork critically. "I'm not very good at drawing yet. Miss Abernathy says I need to practice." She set the drawing aside and watched as Vivian washed the dishes. "Are you going to sleep in Miss Jenkins's old room?" "I suppose so," Vivian answered. "Is that through there?" She nodded toward the door Isaiah had indicated earlier. Charlotte nodded. "It's small, and there might still be some spiders." There was something like a challenge in the girl's voice, as though she were testing Vivian's resolve. "I'm not afraid of spiders," Vivian replied calmly, "as long as they stay on their side of the bed." That earned her another fleeting smile from Charlotte. The girl hopped down from her chair. "I have to go to bed now. Pa says growing children need proper sleep." "That's true," Vivian agreed. "Would you like me to walk you upstairs?" Charlotte shook her head. "I'm not a baby. I can go by myself." She gathered her drawing and headed for the door, then paused, looking back at Vivian. "The stew was good," she admitted, as though the concession cost her something. "Maybe you can make it again sometime." Before Vivian could respond, Charlotte was gone, her light footsteps receding up the stairs. Vivian finished cleaning the kitchen, then took a lamp and ventured through the door that led to what would be her quarters. It was indeed small, just a narrow bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a single window that looked out over the herb garden. But it was clean and dry, with fresh linens on the bed, and a small vase of wildflowers on the dresser, a welcoming touch that surprised her, given Isaiah's reserved manner. Vivian set her lamp on the dresser and unpacked her meager belongings: 2 dresses, spare, undergarments, a hairbrush, and a small leather-bound book that had belonged to her mother. At the bottom of her valise, wrapped in a handkerchief, was a daguerreotype of her family taken when she was 16. Her father stern but kind. Her mother with her gentle smile. Robert tall and proud in his new suit. All gone now. She rewrapped the image carefully and tucked it beneath her mattress. It wouldn't do for anyone to see it, and possibly recognize Robert from the newspaper accounts of the trial. Lastly, she reached into the hidden pocket of her petticoat and withdrew the pocket watch. In the lamplight, its golden surface gleamed, the intricate engravings catching the light. She opened it, revealing the watch face and the inscription inside the cover. "To Emma, my North Star. Forever IT. Isaiah Thornhill's gift to his wife." The item Robert had allegedly stolen after murdering her. The evidence that had sent him to the gallows. Vivian closed the watch and held it tightly in her palm, feeling its weight. How had Robert come to possess it? He had sworn he'd found it, that he'd been planning to turn it in when he was arrested. But no one had believed him. A drifter with a valuable watch that belonged to a murdered woman, the case had seemed clear-cut. But Vivian knew her brother, Robert, wasn't capable of violence, let alone murder. Someone else had killed Emma Thornhill and taken her watch. Someone who had later lost it or discarded it where Robert would find it. And now Vivian was here in the home of the victim, working for the widower, caring for the orphaned child. The pocket watch that had condemned her brother was back where it belonged almost. It wouldn't be truly returned until she knew who had really taken it in the first place, who had really killed Emma Thornhill. Only then could she place it in Isaiah's hands and tell him the truth. That her brother had been innocent. That the real killer was still out there. That justice had not been served for any of them. She rewrapped the watch and hid it beneath a loose floorboard she discovered under the bed, marking the spot mentally. Then she prepared for sleep, washing her face and changing into her nightgown, as the storm continued to rage outside. As she lay in the narrow bed, listening to the rain beat against the window and the occasional rumble of thunder, Vivian found herself thinking of the family whose home she had entered. Isaiah locked in his grief and solitude, Charlotte fierce in her loyalty to her mother's memory, and Emma, the woman whose death had brought them all together in this strange, sad dance. Somewhere in this house, perhaps, in this very garden, her window overlooked, lay answers. And Vivian would find them no matter the cost. The lamp flickered as a particularly strong gust of wind buffeted the house. Shadows danced on the walls, creating the illusion of movement where there was none. Vivian's eyes grew heavy, the exhaustion of her journey and the day's events finally catching up to her. Just as she was drifting off, a soft creak outside her door brought her back to alertness. She sat up, listening. Another creak, like a floorboard settling or being stepped on. "Hello," she called softly. "Charlotte, is that you?" No answer, just the storm and the creaking old house. Vivian lay back down, telling herself it was nothing. But as sleep claimed her, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, not with hostility but with something like curiosity, as though the house itself were taking her measure, deciding whether she belonged. Or perhaps it was just the ghost of Emma Thornhill, wondering what this stranger was doing in her home, sleeping a few feet away from the garden she had once tended with loving hands. The next few days established a rhythm to life at the Thornhill Ranch. Vivian rose early to prepare breakfast, hearty fare of eggs, bacon, flapjacks, and fresh bread. Charlotte, it turned out, had quite an appetite in the mornings and would eat almost anything Vivian set before her. Isaiah would join them briefly, eating quickly, before heading out to oversee the day's work on the ranch. During the day, while Charlotte was at her lessons in town, driven there by one of the ranch hands, Vivian had the house to herself. She used the time to clean, to plan meals, and more surreptitiously to explore. Not that there was much to find. The Thornhill home, for all its size, revealed little about its inhabitants. Isaiah's study remained off-limits. He kept it locked when he wasn't inside. Charlotte's room was the only space that truly felt lived in, with its collection of rocks, feathers, and drawings pinned to the walls. Emma's presence was more elusive. There were few photographs, no personal items left casually about. It was as though Isaiah had systematically removed traces of his wife from the common areas of the house, perhaps to ease his own pain or to protect Charlotte from constant reminders of what she had lost. But there were hints, if one knew where to look. A set of brushes in a drawer that were too fine for a rancher's use. A shelf of books on botany and herb lore in the small library. And most tellingly, the herb garden that had fallen into disrepair after her death. It was this garden that drew Vivian most strongly. On her third morning at the ranch after breakfast had been cleared and Charlotte sent off to her lessons, Vivian found herself standing at the edge of what had once been a meticulously planned herb garden. Now it was overgrown with weeds choking out the cultivated plants, though some hardy herbs, rosemary, thyme, sage, still pushed through stubbornly. "You've taken an interest in Emma's garden." The voice behind her made Vivian start. She turned to find Isaiah standing a few feet away, his expression unreadable as always. She hadn't heard him approach. "It's a shame to see it so neglected," she said carefully. "There are still useful herbs growing here." He looked past her to the tangled garden, something like pain flickering in his eyes before it was suppressed. "No one's tended it since she died. None of us have her touch with plants." "May I?" Vivian asked, gesturing to the garden. "Work on it, I mean, when I have time." Isaiah seemed surprised by the request. "You know about gardening?" "A little," she admitted. "My mother kept herbs for cooking and medicinal use. I helped her." He considered her for a moment, then nodded once. "Do what you like with it. The tools are in the shed." He turned to go, then paused. She loved that garden, spent hours out here talking to the plants like they could hear her. And the admission, this small personal detail about Emma, seemed to surprise him as much as it did Vivian. He cleared his throat. "I'll be checking the north pasture today. Back for supper." And then he was gone, striding toward the stables where his horse waited. Vivian watched him go, struck by the brief glimpse he had allowed her into his grief. It was the most personal thing he had said since her arrival. With a renewed sense of purpose, Vivian retrieved the gardening tools from the shed and set to work. There was something soothing about the physical labor, the feel of soil beneath her fingers, the satisfaction of seeing order slowly emerge from chaos. As she worked, she found herself wondering about Emma, the woman who had created this garden, who had talked to her plants. Had she been happy here? Had she loved her stern, reserved husband? Had she known the person who would take her life? The questions circled in Vivian's mind as she worked, but answers remained elusive. She was so absorbed in her task that she didn't notice the figure watching her from an upstairs window. Charlotte, who had returned early from her lessons due to her teacher's illness. The girl observed Vivian kneeling in her mother's garden, carefully clearing away weeds and dead growth, her expression intent and respectful. It wasn't the action of someone looking to replace another person, but of someone honoring what had come before. Charlotte's small hand pressed against the glass, her reflection overlaying the scene below. "She's fixing your garden, Mama," she whispered to the empty room. "But don't worry, she's not trying to be you. I made sure of that." Down in the garden, unaware of her observer, Vivian continued her work, gradually uncovering the structure of Emma's design. A circular pattern, with wedges like slices of a pie, each dedicated to different types of herbs. Medicinal in one section, culinary in another, fragrant in a third. As she cleared a particularly overgrown area, her hand brushed against something solid buried beneath the soil. Curious, she dug a little deeper and unearthed a small stone marker carved with a single word: "Remember." Vivian sat back on her heels, staring at the marker. Remember what? Was it a memorial of some kind? A reminder Emma had left for herself? She glanced up at the house, a sudden feeling of being watched prickling the back of her neck. The upstairs window was empty, but the sensation remained. She carefully replaced the stone marker where she had found it, and continued her work. But her mind kept returning to that single enigmatic word. Remember. What secrets had Emma Thornhill taken to her grave, and were they connected to the pocket watch that now lay hidden beneath Vivian's floorboard as the sun climbed higher in the sky? Vivian's discoveries in the garden continued. Beneath years of neglect, Emma's careful planning was revealed: plants grouped by purpose, by growing conditions, by harvest times. It spoke of a methodical mind and a deep knowledge of herbalism. "You've made progress." The voice came from behind her again, but this time it wasn't Isaiah. Vivian turned to see a tall, well-dressed man with silver at his temples standing at the edge of the garden. His clothes were too fine for a ranch hand, and his bearing suggested someone accustomed to authority. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said, noting her surprise. The front door was open, and Martha in town mentioned Isaiah had hired a new cook. "I thought I'd introduce myself." He extended a hand. "Silas Warner. I own the bank in Cresswell." Vivian wiped her soil-covered hands on her apron before accepting the handshake. "Vivian Gray." His grip was firm, his smile practiced. "A pleasure, Miss Gray. I see you've taken an interest in Emma's garden." There was something in the way he said Emma's name, a familiarity, perhaps even a trace of old affection. Vivian filed the observation away. It seemed a shame to let it go to waste. Silas nodded, his gaze sweeping over the partially restored garden. Indeed, Emma was quite proud of it. She had a gift. He looked back at Vivian, his eyes assessing. "Are you settling in well? The Thornhill household can be challenging." The question seemed innocent enough, but Vivian sensed an underlying current. Was he merely being neighborly, or was there more to his interest? "Everyone has been very welcoming," she replied neutrally. Silas smiled, though the expression didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's good to hear. Isaiah has kept to himself since Emma's passing. It's not healthy for him or for Charlotte." He glanced toward the house. "Speaking of whom, is the little one at home? I've brought her a book from my recent trip to Denver." Before Vivian could answer, the back door opened and Charlotte appeared on the porch. Her expression, which had been curious, hardened at the sight of Silas. "Mr. Warner," she said, her voice lacking its usual childish lilt, "did Pa invite you?" Silas chuckled, apparently unperturbed by the cool reception. "No need for an invitation among old friends, Charlotte. I brought you something." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small leather-bound book. "Tales from the Arabian Nights. I thought you might enjoy the adventures." Charlotte descended the porch steps slowly, her reluctance evident. She accepted the book with a murmured "thank you" that sounded more like obligation than gratitude. "Your father about?" Silas asked, glancing around as though Isaiah might materialize from behind a tree. "He's checking the north pasture," Charlotte replied. "Won't be back till supper." "Ah, well, another time then." Silas turned his attention back to Vivian. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Miss Gray. I'm sure we'll see more of each other. Cresswell is a small community after all." With a tip of his hat, he departed, walking around the side of the house toward the front, where presumably his horse or carriage waited. Vivian watched him go, struck by the curious interaction and Charlotte's obvious dislike of the man. "I don't like him," Charlotte announced as soon as Silas was out of earshot, confirming Vivian's observation. "He pretends to be Pa's friend, but he's not. He just wants our ranch." Vivian raised an eyebrow. "What makes you say that?" Charlotte clutched the book to her chest, her expression serious beyond her years. "I heard him talking to Pa once, after Mama died. He said the ranch was too much for Pa to handle alone, that he should consider selling. Pa got real mad." She looked down at the book in her hands. "He brings me presents because he thinks it will make Pa like him more. But Pa doesn't like him either. He just has to be polite because Mr. Warner owns the bank." It was a surprisingly astute assessment from a 7-year-old, and it added another layer to Vivian's understanding of the dynamics in Cresswell. "Well," she said, rising from her kneeling position in the garden, "it was thoughtful of him to bring you a book regardless of his reasons." Charlotte shrugged, already losing interest in the topic. She peered at the partially restored garden. "You made it look better," she observed. "Like before." "It's not finished," Vivian said, "but I think your mother would be pleased with the progress." Charlotte's gaze snapped to Vivian's face, searching for any sign of condescension or false sentiment. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "Mama loved her garden. She said plants were like people, they need love and care to grow strong." The insight into Emma's character offered so artlessly by her daughter touched Vivian deeply. "That sounds like a wise observation." Charlotte stared at the garden a moment longer, then abruptly changed the subject. "I'm hungry. Miss Abernathy got sick, so I came home early. Can I have a sandwich?" The shift from momentary vulnerability back to practical concerns was so typically childlike that Vivian had to smile. "Of course. Let's go inside and wash up." As they walked back to the house, Charlotte still clutching her new book. Vivian reflected on the morning's revelations, the stone marker in the garden with its cryptic message, Silas Warner's interest in the Thornhill Ranch, and his history with Emma, Charlotte's perceptiveness about the adults around her. Each piece added to the puzzle she was trying to solve. But the central question remained, who had killed Emma Thornhill, and why the pocket watch hidden beneath her floorboard seemed to grow heavier with each new discovery, a constant reminder of her purpose here and the truth she sought. A truth that she was beginning to suspect might be more complex and more dangerous than she had initially believed. The days stretched into a week, and Vivian found herself falling into the rhythm of life at the Thornhill Ranch. Each morning she rose before dawn to prepare breakfast. Each evening she served supper to Charlotte, and prepared a tray for Isaiah, who still ate alone in his study more often than not. In between, she continued her restoration of Emma's garden, uncovering more of its original design, and even harvesting some of the hardier herbs for her cooking. The work gave her a sense of purpose beyond her search for the truth, and she found herself genuinely enjoying the physical labor and the satisfaction of bringing order to the neglected space. Her relationship with Charlotte evolved gradually. The girl remained wary, but no longer openly hostile. She hadn't placed any spiders in Vivian's bed, which Vivian chose to interpret as progress. They had developed a routine of sorts. Charlotte would sit at the kitchen table after her lessons drawing or reading, while Vivian prepared dinner, occasionally asking questions or offering observations about her day. Isaiah remained more of an enigma. He was unfailingly polite, but maintained his distance, rarely engaging in conversation beyond what was necessary for the functioning of the household. Yet Vivian noticed small changes. He lingered a bit longer at breakfast. Sometimes she would look up from her work in the garden to find him watching from a distance before he turned away. And then there were the gifts, if they could be called that. A pair of gardening gloves, new and sturdy, left by her door one morning. A book on local plant species that appeared on the kitchen table. Never acknowledged, never mentioned, but clearly intended for her use. It was as though he were thawing degree by imperceptible degree, like a frozen river in the first tentative days of spring. On the evening of her 8th day at the ranch, Vivian was in the kitchen preparing a chicken pot pie, a dish Charlotte had specifically requested after hearing that it was Vivian's childhood favorite. The girl was at the table as usual, but instead of drawing, she was carefully arranging a collection of small, smooth stones in patterns only she understood. "These are from the creek," she explained when she caught Vivian looking. "Pa says they're quartz. They shine when they're wet." "They're beautiful," Vivian said, rolling out pastry dough for the pie crust. "Do you collect many things from nature?" Charlotte nodded. "Rocks, feathers, interesting leaves. Mama taught me to press flowers, but I don't do that anymore." A shadow crossed her face. "They remind me too much of her." Vivian's hands stilled on the rolling pin. It was the most direct reference Charlotte had made to her grief, and she wasn't sure how to respond. Before she could formulate an answer, Charlotte continued, her voice matter of fact. "I talk to her sometimes. At night, when Pa thinks I'm asleep." Vivian resumed her rolling, keeping her tone casual despite the quickening of her pulse. "Oh, what do you talk about? Everything, my day, the rocks I found. How much I miss her." Charlotte arranged 3 white stones in a triangle. "Sometimes she answers me." Vivian glanced at the girl, uncertain whether this was a child's fantasy or something more concerning. "What does she say?" Charlotte shrugged. "Different things. Mostly that she loves me, and that she's watching over me." She looked up suddenly, her gray eyes serious. "Do you believe in ghosts, Miss Gray?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with more significance than its simple words suggested. Vivian considered her answer carefully. "I believe that those we love stay with us in a way," she said finally. "In our memories, in the things they taught us, in the parts of ourselves that are like them." Charlotte seemed to consider this. "But do you think they can really be here, not just in our minds, but actually here?" "I don't know," Vivian admitted. "I've never seen a ghost, but I try to keep an open mind about things I haven't experienced myself." This answer seemed to satisfy Charlotte. She returned to her stone arrangement, adding a blue-gray pebble to the center of the triangle. "Mama liked you working in her garden," she said casually, as though discussing the weather. "She told me so last night." A chill ran down Vivian's spine, despite the warm kitchen. She reminded herself that this was simply a child's way of processing grief, of maintaining a connection to her lost mother. And yet, I'm glad, she said softly. I've tried to be respectful of her design. Charlotte nodded approvingly. That's why she likes you. The others tried to change things. Miss Jenkins wanted to plant vegetables instead of herbs. Mama was very angry about that. Before Vivian could respond to this unsettling revelation, the back door opened and Isaiah entered, bringing with him the scent of horses and open air. He paused, taking in the domestic scene before him, his daughter at the table with her rocks, Vivian at the counter with flour dusting her hands and forearms. "Pa," Charlotte exclaimed, jumping up from her chair. "Look what I found at the creek today." She grabbed a particularly large piece of quartz and held it up for his inspection. Isaiah's stern expression softened as he crouched down to his daughter's level, examining the stone with exaggerated interest. "That's a fine specimen, Charlie. One of the best I've seen." The nickname and the gentle tone were such a departure from his usual reserve that Vivian found herself staring. In that moment, with his guard down, Isaiah Thornhill was a different man, a father capable of tenderness, a man who had known joy before sorrow etched itself into the lines of his face. He glanced up, catching her watching, and something passed between them, a moment of recognition, perhaps, or understanding. Then he straightened, clearing his throat as his customary reserve settled back into place. "Something smells good," he said, nodding toward the partially assembled pot pie. "Chicken pot pie," Charlotte informed him. "Miss Gray is teaching me how to make it. It's her favorite." "Is it?" Isaiah looked at Vivian with mild curiosity. "It was my mother's recipe," she explained, feeling oddly self-conscious under his gaze. "My brother and I used to request it for special occasions." The mention of her brother slipped out before she could stop herself. It was the first time she had referenced Robert in their presence, and she held her breath, waiting to see if the name triggered any recognition. But Isaiah only nodded, his expression unchanged. "Family recipes are special that way. They carry memories." The simple observation delivered in his deep, quiet voice struck Vivian as unexpectedly profound. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak past the sudden tightness in her throat. Isaiah seemed to sense her emotion. He turned his attention back to Charlotte. "Why don't you put your treasures away and wash up for dinner? I'll join you both tonight if that's all right." The last part was directed at Vivian, a question rather than an assumption. It was the first time he had explicitly asked to join them for a meal rather than taking his supper in his study. "Of course," she said, finding her voice. "There's plenty for everyone." Charlotte, clearly delighted by this departure from routine, gathered her stones and scampered off to wash up. Isaiah lingered in the kitchen, moving to the sink to wash his own hands. "The garden is looking better," he said, his back to Vivian, as he scrubbed the day's dirt from his skin. "You've made real progress." "Thank you," Vivian replied, resuming her work on the pie crust. "It's been rewarding to see it come back to life." He dried his hands on a towel, turning to face her. "Emma would have appreciated your care with it. She was particular about her plants." There it was again, that rare personal detail about his wife offered without prompting. Vivian seized the opportunity to learn more. Charlotte mentioned that her mother taught her to press flowers. A shadow of old pain crossed Isaiah's face, but he didn't retreat behind his usual wall of reserve. Yes, Emma kept albums of pressed specimens, labeled with their scientific names, medicinal properties, growing conditions. She was methodical that way. His lips curved in what might have been a smile or a grimace. She used to say that understanding plants was the key to understanding people. "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Vivian said softly. Isaiah's gaze grew distant. "She was. Educated, accomplished. could have had a very different life than the one she chose with me." The admission seemed to surprise him, as though he hadn't meant to reveal so much. He straightened visibly, pulling himself back from the edge of vulnerability. "I should clean up before dinner." He left the kitchen, his footsteps receding up the stairs. Vivian remained at the counter, rolling pin in hand, absorbing what she had learned. Emma Thornhill, educated and accomplished. A woman who had chosen life on a remote ranch with Isaiah over other possibilities. A woman who had kept meticulous records of her botanical knowledge. Records that might still exist somewhere in this house. The thought took root as Vivian finished preparing the pot pie and placed it in the oven to bake. If Emma had been as methodical as Isaiah described, she might have kept journals or notes about her daily life, not just her plants. Those records could contain clues about her final days, about who might have wished her harm. But where would such personal items be kept? Isaiah's locked study seemed the most likely location. Or perhaps Charlotte's room. The girl might have kept some of her mother's belongings close for comfort. Vivian's musings were interrupted by Charlotte's returned face, freshly scrubbed, and hair neatly combed. "Is the pie ready yet? I'm starving." "Almost," Vivian assured her, pushing aside her speculations for the time being. "Would you like to help set the table? We'll need 3 places tonight." Charlotte nodded eagerly, clearly pleased by the prospect of a family dinner. As they worked together, laying out plates and silverware, Vivian found herself warming to the domestic scene despite her ulterior motives for being there. There was something undeniably pleasant about preparing a meal for others, about the simple act of gathering around a table to share food and conversation. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine that this was real, that she was truly just a cook in this household, with no hidden agenda, no painful history connecting her to these people. It was a seductive fantasy, but one she couldn't afford to indulge. She was here for Robert, for justice, for truth. The rest was just a role she was playing, a necessary deception, to uncover what had really happened to Emma Thornhill that fateful day 3 years ago. She couldn't lose sight of that, no matter how comfortable this false life might become. And yet, as Isaiah joined them at the table and Charlotte chattered happily about her day, Vivian couldn't help feeling a twinge of guilt. These people had suffered enough. The truth she sought might bring them more pain before it brought any healing. But it was too late to turn back now. She had made her choice when she stepped onto that stagecoach with her brother's pocket watch and her promise to clear his name. Whatever came next, she would see it through to the end. For better or worse, their fates were now intertwined, the grieving widower, the motherless child, and the woman with a dead man's watch hidden beneath her floorboard. A strange trinity bound by a tragedy none of them fully understood. Not yet, anyway. But Vivian was determined that would change. Soon. The following days brought a subtle shift in the rhythm of the Thornhill household. The shared dinner had broken some invisible barrier, and Isaiah began joining them for meals more regularly. He rarely contributed much to the conversation, content to listen, as Charlotte regaled them with tales from her lessons or discoveries from her explorations of the ranch. But his presence felt significant nonetheless, a tentative step toward something resembling normalcy. For Vivian, this development brought mixed emotions. On one hand, it provided more opportunities to observe Isaiah, to learn about Emma through the occasional personal detail he would let slip. On the other, it made her increasingly uncomfortable with her deception. The more human he became to her, the more difficult it was to see him simply as the widower of the woman whose death had condemned her brother. The garden continued to flourish under Vivian's care. What had been a tangled mess of weeds and neglect was gradually returning to its former beauty. She had cleared nearly all the beds now, revealing Emma's careful design a wheel pattern with the most delicate herbs near the center and the hardier varieties along the outer ring. Many of the perennial herbs had survived the years of neglect, their roots stubbornly holding on to life beneath the surface. It was in the garden on a warm afternoon 10 days after her arrival that Vivian made her most significant discovery yet. She was on her knees, carefully clearing a section near the stone marker she had found earlier when her trowel struck something solid. At first, she thought it might be a root or a larger stone, but as she dug around it, she realized it was a small metal box about the size of a deck of cards buried several inches beneath the soil. Glancing toward the house to ensure she wasn't observed, Vivian carefully extracted the box. It was made of tin, tarnished with age and exposure to the elements, but the lid was still tightly sealed. There were no markings on its surface, nothing to indicate its purpose or owner. Her heart raced as she pried open the lid. Inside, protected from the elements by the sealed container, was a small leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed but intact. And beneath it, wrapped in a scrap of silk, a key. Vivian lifted the journal with trembling fingers. The first page bore a simple inscription in elegant handwriting: Emma Thornhill, Private Thoughts, 1882. She had found Emma's diary. The sound of approaching footsteps made her start. Quickly, she slipped the journal and key into her apron pocket and replaced the empty box in its hole, covering it with soil. She had just finished when Charlotte appeared around the corner of the house. "Miss Graypaw says there's a storm coming, and you should finish up out here." Vivian looked up at the sky, noting the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. She had been so absorbed in her discovery that she hadn't noticed the changing weather. "Thank you, Charlotte. I'm just about done." The girl lingered watching as Vivian gathered her gardening tools. "What did you find?" The question, delivered with innocent curiosity, sent a jolt through Vivian. Had Charlotte seen her unearth the box? "Find," she echoed, striving to keep her voice casual. "In the garden," Charlotte clarified. "You looked excited about something." Vivian thought quickly. "Oh, just some healthy lavender roots. I wasn't sure if that section had survived, but it looks like it will come back next season." Charlotte seemed to accept this explanation, her interest already shifting elsewhere. "Can we make cookies this afternoon, since it's going to rain, and I can't go outside?" Relieved by the change of subject, Vivian nodded. "Sugar cookies, or would you prefer ginger?" "Sugar," Charlotte decided, "with cinnamon on top." They walked back to the house together, Charlotte chattering about her favorite cookies, while Vivian's mind raced the journal, a tangible weight against her side. She would have to find a private moment to read it away from curious eyes. Perhaps tonight, after Charlotte was asleep and Isaiah had retired to his study. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of domestic activity. Vivian and Charlotte made cookies, filling the kitchen with the sweet scent of butter, sugar, and cinnamon. The promised storm arrived as they worked, rain lashing against the windows and wind howling around the eaves of the old house. Isaiah returned from his work just as the cookies were cooling, bringing with him the scent of rain and the outdoors. He stomped his boots in the mudroom, then entered the kitchen in his stocking feet, his hair damp from the downpour. "Something smells good." He observed his gaze, taking in the scene before him. Charlotte, with flour on her cheek. Vivian, arranging the freshly baked cookies on a plate. "We made sugar cookies," Charlotte announced proudly. "Miss Gray let me roll the dough and cut the shapes." "Did she now?" Isaiah's expression softened as he looked at his daughter. "And a fine job you did by the look of them." Charlotte beamed under the praise. "You can have one, but only one before dinner. That's the rule." Isaiah raised an eyebrow at Vivian, a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. "Is that so? Chef's orders," Vivian confirmed with a small smile. We wouldn't want to spoil your appetite. He accepted a cookie from the plate Charlotte held out, taking a bite with appropriate solemnity. Excellent, he pronounced. Perhaps the best sugar cookie I've had. Charlotte giggled, delighted by her father's play acting. Better than Mama's. The question hung in the air, innocent but loaded. Vivian held her breath, wondering if the mention of Emma would cause Isaiah to retreat behind his usual reserve. But he surprised her. Different, he said gently. Your mama put orange zest in hers, remember? But these are wonderful in their own way. Charlotte seemed to consider this, then nodded satisfied. Miss Gray can make them with orange next time. I'll show her how Mama did it. I'd like that, Vivian said softly, touched by the child's willingness to share this piece of her mother. Isaiah's gaze met hers over Charlotte's head, something unreadable in his gray eyes. Gratitude, perhaps, or acknowledgement of the delicate balance Vivian was maintaining, honoring Emma's memory while creating her own place in the household. The moment passed, and Isaiah turned his attention to practical matters. The creek's rising with the rain. I've had the men move the livestock to higher ground, but if it continues like this through the night, we might have problems. Will it flood the house? Charlotte asked, her eyes wide. Isaiah shook his head. No, sweetheart. The house is well above the flood line, but the road to town might be washed out for a day or two. The news didn't particularly concern Vivian. They had ample supplies, and a few days of isolation wouldn't affect her search for the truth. In fact, it might provide an opportunity to explore the house more thoroughly while the ranch hands were occupied with flood preparations. I'll make sure we have plenty of lamps and candles ready, she said, in case the power goes out. Isaiah nodded, seemingly pleased by her practical response. Good thinking. I'll bring in some extra firewood before it gets any worse out there. The rest of the evening passed quietly. Vivian prepared a hearty beef stew for dinner, perfect for the chilly, damp weather. They ate in the kitchen rather than the formal dining room, the space feeling cozier with the storm raging outside. Charlotte, excited by the drama of the weather, regaled them with exaggerated tales of previous storms she remembered, while Isaiah gently corrected her more fanciful recollections. It was almost, Vivian thought, with a pang, like a real family. After dinner, Isaiah helped Charlotte with her bath and bedtime routine, while Vivian cleaned the kitchen and prepared for the next day. By the time he returned downstairs, the storm had intensified, wind shrieking around the house and rain pounding against the roof with such force it sounded like horses galloping overhead. Charlotte's finally asleep, he said, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of weariness. The storm makes her restless. It's quite something, Vivian agreed, glancing toward the window where water streamed down the glass in sheets. Will you be turning in soon? Isaiah shook his head. I need to check the weather reports and make some notes for tomorrow. The men will need clear instructions if the creek floods. He hesitated, then added, Would you mind bringing some coffee to my study in about an hour? I expect it will be a long night. Of course, Vivian replied, trying to quell the sudden acceleration of her heartbeat. His study, the one room in the house that remained off-limits, the place most likely to contain information about Emma's final days. Thank you. He paused at the door, looking back at her. For everything. Charlotte seems happier since you came. It's been a long time since I've heard her laugh like she did today. The simple admission delivered in his deep, quiet voice struck Vivian to the core. She's a wonderful child, she said softly. You've done well with her under difficult circumstances. Something flickered in his eyes, gratitude perhaps, or a deeper emotion she couldn't name. Then he nodded once and was gone, his footsteps receding down the hallway toward his study. Vivian stood in the empty kitchen listening to the storm and the creaking of the old house. The journal in her apron pocket seemed to burn against her side, a constant reminder of her purpose here. She should read it now, while she had some privacy. But first she would deliver Isaiah's coffee as promised, and perhaps gain a glimpse into his closely guarded domain. She waited until the appointed time, then prepared a tray with coffee, sugar, and cream. Her hands trembled slightly as she made her way down the hallway to the study door. It was ajar, warm lamplight spilling out into the darkened corridor. Vivian knocked lightly. "Mr. Thornhill, I've brought your coffee." "Come in," came his voice from within. She pushed the door open with her shoulder, balancing the tray carefully as she entered. The study was exactly as she had glimpsed it on her first day, walls lined with bookshelves, a large desk dominated by ledgers and papers, a comfortable leather armchair beside a small fireplace where a fire now crackled, warding off the dampness of the storm. Isaiah sat behind the desk, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he studied what appeared to be a map of the ranch. He looked up as she entered, removing his glasses. "Thank you. You can set it here." He cleared a space on the corner of his desk. Vivian placed the tray down carefully, acutely aware of her surroundings. This was Isaiah's private domain, the place where he retreated from the world. Being here felt like an intrusion, regardless of the invitation. Her gaze fell on the photograph she had noticed during her brief previous visit, Emma smiling gently at the camera, her blonde curls framing a face of delicate beauty. Seeing her clearly for the first time sent a jolt through Vivian. This was the woman whose death had set everything in motion. No longer an abstract concept, but a real person who had lived and breathed and been loved. "That was taken about a year before she died," Isaiah said, following Vivian's gaze, "her 29th birthday." Vivian looked at him, surprised by the voluntary offering of information. "She was beautiful." "Yes." His expression softened with memory. "Inside and out. She had a way of seeing the best in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves." He picked up the photograph, his thumb tracing the edge of the frame. "She's the one who convinced me to buy this ranch when my father died. I wanted to sell it, move to Denver, set up a proper medical practice. But Emma loved this land, this house, said it had good bones and a strong heart like me." A sad smile touched his lips. "She always did have a fanciful way of putting things." It was the most he had ever said about Emma at one time, and Vivian found herself wanting to know more, not just for her investigation, but out of genuine interest. "You were a doctor before you became a rancher." Isaiah nodded, setting the photograph back in its place. "Army surgeon during the war. Came back and helped my father with his practice here in Cresswell, while also managing the ranch. After he died, I had to choose." He looked around the study, his gaze distant. "Sometimes I wonder if I chose wrong. If we'd moved to Denver, Emma might still be alive." The admission caught Vivian off guard. It suggested that Isaiah connected Emma's death specifically to their location to the ranch itself. "Why do you say that?" He seemed to realize he had said too much. His expression closed off, the momentary openness gone. "Just a thought. The city would have been safer in some ways, fewer dangers." But Vivian wasn't fooled. There had been something specific in his mind when he made that statement, some connection between the ranch and Emma's death that he wasn't sharing. Before she could decide whether to press further, a tremendous crash of thunder shook the house, followed immediately by a high-pitched scream from upstairs. "Charlotte," Isaiah said, already on his feet and moving toward the door. Vivian followed him without thinking, hurrying up the stairs to Charlotte's bedroom. They found the little girl sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with terror, her blankets clutched to her chest. "The lightning," she gasped when she saw them. "It was so close." Isaiah sat on the edge of her bed, gathering her into his arms. "It's all right, sweetheart. Just a storm. The house has weathered worse." Charlotte buried her face in her father's shirt. "I dreamed Mama was outside in the garden calling for help. She was all wet from the rain." Isaiah tensed his arms, tightening around his daughter. "It was just a dream, Charlie. Your Mama's not out in the storm." "But it seemed so real," Charlotte insisted, pulling back to look at her father's face. "Maybe we should check, just to be sure." Isaiah exchanged a glance with Vivian over Charlotte's head, his expression a mix of concern and helplessness. This wasn't the first time the child had experienced such dreams, Vivian realized. This was a recurring manifestation of her grief. "I can check the garden if it would make you feel better," Vivian offered gently. Charlotte turned to her hope, lighting her tear-stained face. "Would you—" and call for her so she knows to come inside? Vivian's heart ached for the child's desperate need to believe her mother was still somehow present. "Of course," Isaiah gave her a grateful look. "You don't have to go outside in this weather," he said. "Just looking out the window will be enough to satisfy Charlotte." But Vivian understood what the child needed. "It's no trouble. I'll take a lantern to the back porch and call from there. The garden is visible from the steps." Charlotte nodded vigorously. "Yes, and tell her to come in where it's warm and dry." "I will," Vivian promised, her throat tight with emotion. "Now try to get back to sleep. Your father will stay with you until you do." She left them there, Isaiah murmuring soft reassurances to his daughter, and made her way downstairs. In the kitchen, she found a lantern and lit it, then wrapped herself in a shawl before stepping out onto the back porch. The storm's fury hit her full force wind, driving the rain sideways, lightning illuminating the landscape in brief, stark flashes. The garden, which had been so peaceful in the afternoon sunlight, now looked wild and forbidding. Plants whipping back and forth in the gale. Feeling slightly foolish, but determined to keep her promise to Charlotte, Vivian raised her voice against the wind. "Emma, it's time to come inside now. Charlotte is waiting for you." The words were torn away by the storm, lost in the greater violence of nature. Vivian stood for a moment longer, rain soaking the edges of her shawl, watching the garden for any sign of movement beyond the wind-tossed plants. There was nothing, of course, just rain and darkness and the ghostly shapes of Emma's beloved herbs struggling against the storm, as they had struggled against neglect. With a sigh, Vivian turned to go back inside. As she reached for the door handle, a flash of lightning illuminated the garden one more time, and for an instant, a mere fragment of a second, she thought she saw a figure standing among the herbs. A woman in a light-colored dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. Vivian froze, her heart pounding in her chest. But when the next lightning flash came, the garden was empty again. Just plants and rain and the tricks of light and shadow. Shaken, she hurried back inside, attributing the vision to a combination of Charlotte's suggestible talk of ghosts, the eerie storm light, and her own heightened emotions after discovering Emma's journal. There were no such things as ghosts, only the living and their haunted memories. She removed her damp shawl and made her way back upstairs to Charlotte's room. The door was partially open, and through the gap she could see Isaiah sitting beside his sleeping daughter, his large hand gently stroking her curls. The tenderness of the gesture, the naked love on his usually guarded face, made Vivian pause, feeling like an intruder on a private moment. She was about to retreat when Isaiah looked up and saw her. He carefully extricated himself from Charlotte's side and joined Vivian in the hallway, pulling the door mostly closed behind him. "She's asleep," he said quietly. "Thank you for humoring her. They've been happening since Emma died, less frequently now, but still. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Vivian had come to recognize as a sign of emotional strain. The therapist in Denver says it's normal, part of her grieving process. Of course, Vivian said softly. Children process loss differently than adults. Sometimes they need these connections. Isaiah studied her face in the dim hallway light. You're very understanding about it. Most people find it disturbing a child talking to her dead mother. Vivian thought of her own grief after losing her parents, how she had sometimes set a place for her mother at the dinner table, unable to accept that she would never again occupy that chair. Grief isn't rational, she said. It doesn't follow rules or timelines, especially for a child. Something in Isaiah's expression shifted, a softening around his eyes. No, it doesn't, he agreed quietly. For any of us. They stood there in the darkened hallway, the storm raging outside, connected by this shared understanding of loss. For a moment, Vivian forgot her ulterior motives for being in this house. For a moment, she was simply a woman talking to a man who had suffered, offering what comfort her own experience of grief could provide. Then Isaiah straightened, the vulnerable moment passing. You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be busy, if the creek floods as expected. Yes, Vivian agreed, stepping back. Good night, Mr. Thornhill. Isaiah, he said, surprising her. I think, after all this time, you might call me Isaiah. It was a small gesture, but one that spoke volumes about the gradual thawing of his reserve. Good night, Isaiah, she amended, testing the name on her tongue. Good night, Vivian, he replied. And for the first time since her arrival, he smiled a real smile that reached his eyes, transforming his face from handsome to breathtaking. Then he was gone, retreating back to his study and his solitary vigil against the storm, leaving Vivian in the hallway with her racing heart and the weight of Emma's journal still hidden in her pocket. Later, in the privacy of her small room, Vivian finally had the opportunity to examine her discoveries from the garden. The storm continued to rage outside, providing a constant background of rain and wind that would cover any small sounds she might make. She removed the journal from her pocket and held it reverently in her hands. This was Emma's private thoughts, her innermost reflections. Reading it felt invasive, a violation of a dead woman's privacy. And yet, it might contain the clues Vivian needed to understand what had happened 3 years ago. With a deep breath, she opened the journal and began to read by the light of her bedside lamp. The early entries were mundane daily observations about the ranch, notes on Charlotte's development as a toddler, plans for the garden. Emma's voice emerged clearly from the pages, intelligent, observant, with a gentle humor and deep love for her husband and daughter. She wrote of Isaiah with such tenderness that Vivian found herself blushing at times, as though she had accidentally stumbled upon something intimate and private. But as she continued reading, the tone of the entries began to change. About 6 months before her death, Emma's writing became more guarded, more cryptic. She referenced concerns and suspicions without elaborating. There were mentions of conversations with Silas Warner that left her uneasy, though she never specified why. And then, 3 months before her death, a particularly troubling entry, April 15, 1882, I found something today that I was never meant to see. Papers in S's office that suggest a plan far more insidious than I had feared. I cannot bring myself to write the details here in case this journal is found, but I have hidden the evidence where only I or someone who thinks as I do would think to look. I must decide what to do. Confronting S directly could be dangerous not just for me, but for Charlotte and Isaiah. But how can I remain silent, knowing what I know? The watch Isaiah gave me for our anniversary has become my talisman. I hold it when I'm afraid, Remember his inscription, "My North Star." I must be guided by what is right, what is true, no matter the cost. Vivian's hands trembled as she read these words. S's office. Silas Warner. It seemed the most likely interpretation given Emma's earlier mentions of uncomfortable interactions with him. But what had she discovered? What insidious plan had she uncovered? The next several entries were equally vague, with Emma documenting her growing anxiety, but never explicitly stating its cause. She wrote of being watched, of feeling unsafe, even in her own home. And then, just 2 weeks before her death, a final entry, May 2nd, 1882, "I've made my decision. Tomorrow I will tell Isaiah everything. I've gathered all the evidence, including the original documents, from S's office. Isaiah will know what to do, how to proceed legally. I only pray that he forgives me for not coming to him sooner, for thinking I could handle this alone. If anything should happen to me, I've left a key to the truth in the garden beneath the stone marked, 'Remember.' The box contains this journal and the key to the small compartment behind the bookshelf in my reading nook, where I've hidden the evidence. May God protect us all in the days to come." That was the last entry. 2 weeks later, according to the newspaper accounts Vivian had read, Emma Thornhill was found dead near the creek that ran through the eastern edge of the property, her skull crushed by what appeared to be a rock. Her gold pocket watch, the anniversary gift from Isaiah, was missing, presumably taken by her killer. The watch that now lay hidden beneath Vivian's floorboard. Vivian closed the journal, her mind racing with implications. Emma had discovered something dangerous involving someone whose name began with almost certainly Silas Warner. She had gathered evidence and planned to tell Isaiah the day before her death. Had Silas somehow learned of her intentions? Had he killed her to silence her? It would explain why the watch was taken, not for its monetary value, but to make the crime appear to be a robbery gone wrong. But what had Emma discovered that was worth killing for? And why had Isaiah never mentioned any of this? Surely Emma would have told him if she suspected Silas of wrongdoing. Unless she never got the chance, or unless Isaiah already knew and had his own reasons for keeping silent. The thought sent a chill through Vivian. She had been operating under the assumption that Isaiah was as much a victim as Emma, that he had no knowledge of the true circumstances of his wife's death. But what if he was somehow involved? What if the stern, grief-stricken widower was hiding darker secrets than she had imagined? No, she couldn't believe that. Not the man who sat by his daughter's bedside, gently stroking her hair until she fell asleep. Not the man who left gardening gloves by her door and spoke of his dead wife with such tender regret. But then she hadn't believed her brother capable of murder either, and the world had not shared her conviction. Vivian turned her attention to the key she had found with the journal. According to Emma's final entry, it opened a compartment behind a bookshelf in her reading nook, a place Vivian had yet to identify in her explorations of the house. She would need to find this nook and the evidence Emma had hidden there. But it would have to wait. Tonight, with the storm raging and the household on alert for flooding, was not the time for further investigations. Carefully, she rewrapped the journal and key in the scrap of silk and hid them beneath her mattress, a temporary measure, until she could return them to their hiding place beneath the floorboard. Then she changed into her nightgown and prepared for bed, her mind still churning with questions and possibilities. As she lay in the darkness, listening to the storm, Vivian found herself thinking of Emma not as a victim or a mystery to be solved, but as the woman who emerged from the pages of her journal. Intelligent, loving, brave. A woman who had discovered something dangerous and had been prepared to face it to protect her family and see justice done. In that, perhaps they were kindred spirits, both willing to risk everything for truth and justice. Both caught in circumstances beyond their control. I'll finish what you started, Vivian whispered into the darkness, a promise to the ghost of a woman she had never met, but was coming to know through her words and the imprint she had left on this house and its inhabitants. I'll find the truth you died for. Outside, the storm raged on, as if nature itself were bearing witness to her vow. Morning broke clear and bright, the storm having blown itself out sometime in the early hours. Vivian rose with the dawn, eager to assess any damage and begin the day's work. The house had weathered the tempest well, with only a few minor leaks in the attic to show for the night's fury. The same could not be said for the rest of the property. When Isaiah returned from his early inspection of the ranch, his expression was grim. "The creek's jumped its banks," he reported as he entered the kitchen where Vivian was preparing breakfast. "Road to town is washed out as expected. We've lost a section of the east fence, and 2 of the storage sheds are flooded." "Any animals lost?" Vivian asked, setting a cup of coffee before him. He shook his head. "No, thank God. The men got them all to higher ground in time." He took a grateful sip of the coffee. "But we've got a day's hard work ahead to start repairs. I've sent word to neighboring ranches for assistance. They'll help us now, and we'll return the favor when needed." "What can I do?" Vivian asked, practical as always. Isaiah considered her question seriously. "The men will need feeding a midday meal they can eat quickly before getting back to work. And Charlotte should stay close to the house today. The creek's still dangerous." Vivian nodded. "I'll manage both. Don't worry." He gave her a look of genuine gratitude. "You're a godsend, Vivian. I don't know how we managed before you came." The simple compliment warmed her more than it should have. "Go on with you," she said lightly, turning back to the stove to hide the flush she felt rising in her cheeks. "Flattery won't get you extra bacon." Isaiah chuckled, a sound so rare that it made her turn back in surprise. "Can't blame a man for trying," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Then, more soberly, "Thank you for everything." Before she could respond, Charlotte bounded into the kitchen, her curls wild from sleep. "Is the creek really flooded?" she asked eagerly. "Can I go see?" Isaiah's expression sobered. "Not today, Charlie. It's too dangerous. You need to stay near the house with Miss Gray." Charlotte's face fell in disappointment. "But, Pa—" "No arguments," he said firmly. "The current's too strong and there's debris in the water. I need to know you're safe while I'm working on repairs." Vivian, seeing the brewing storm on Charlotte's face, intervened quickly. "I was thinking we might bake bread today," she suggested, "and maybe make some jam tarts for the men working on the repairs. They'll be hungry after all that hard work." Charlotte's expression brightened slightly at this prospect. "Can I knead the dough? Mama always let me knead it." "Of course," Vivian assured her. "You can be my official assistant for the day." Crisis averted. Isaiah gave Vivian another grateful look before turning his attention to breakfast. The meal was a hurried affair, with Isaiah eager to begin the day's work, and Charlotte full of questions about the flood and its effects on the ranch. After Isaiah departed, Vivian and Charlotte set to work on their baking projects. The girl proved to be a willing and capable helper, measuring ingredients carefully and kneading the bread dough with surprising strength for one so small. As they worked, Vivian casually steered the conversation toward the house itself, hoping to learn more about its layout, and specifically the location of Emma's reading nook. "This is such a beautiful old house," she commented as they set the bread dough aside to rise. "I feel like I've barely seen half of it. Are there many rooms I haven't explored yet?" Charlotte, proud of her knowledge, was happy to play tour guide. "Oh yes, there's the formal parlor that we never use, and Pa's office, and the library, and the sunroom where Mama used to read." She ticked them off on flour-dusted fingers. "And upstairs, There's the guest rooms and the sewing room and the little room off Mama and Pa's bedroom that used to be mine when I was a baby. The mention of a sunroom caught Vivian's attention. Your mother liked to read in the sunroom. That sounds lovely. Charlotte nodded enthusiastically. She called it her thinking place. She had all her plant books there and her special chair and a little desk where she wrote in her journal. The girl's expression grew wistful. Pa closed it up after she died. Said it was too painful, but sometimes I sneak in anyway, just to sit in her chair and pretend she's reading to me. This had to be the reading nook Emma had mentioned in her journal. Where is this sunroom? Vivian asked, trying to sound merely curious rather than eager. At the east end of the house past the library, Charlotte replied. It has windows on 3 sides, so the sun comes in all day. Mama said it was her favorite place in the whole house. Vivian filed this information away, already planning how she might access the room without arousing suspicion. It sounds wonderful. Perhaps someday your father will open it again. Charlotte shrugged, already losing interest in the topic. Maybe. Can we make the jam tarts now? The strawberry jam, not the blackberry. The men like strawberry best. The rest of the morning passed in a flurry of baking activity. By noon, they had produced 4 loaves of bread, 3 dozen jam tarts, and a large pot of hearty beef and vegetable soup for the workers. Vivian sent it all out to the repair sites with one of the kitchen staff earning effusive thanks from the hungry men. After lunch, Charlotte reluctantly settled down for her daily reading lesson, leaving Vivian with an unexpected pocket of free time. It was the perfect opportunity to investigate the sunroom and search for the hiding place Emma had mentioned in her journal. I'm going to check on the garden after the storm, she told Charlotte. Will you be all right on your own for a little while? You can come find me when you've finished your chapter. Charlotte, absorbed in her book, nodded without looking up. I'll be fine. It's not like I'm a baby who needs watching every minute. Vivian smiled at the girl's indignation. Of course not. I'll see you soon. Instead of heading directly outside, however, Vivian made her way through the house toward the east wing. She had never explored this section before, having no legitimate reason to venture beyond the kitchen, dining room, and main living areas. The library was easy to identify, a large room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and comfortable leather chairs arranged around a cold fireplace. Beyond it, just as Charlotte had described, was a corridor leading to a set of French doors. These were closed with heavy curtains drawn across them on the inside, blocking any view of the room beyond. Vivian tried the handle cautiously, locked as she had expected. She glanced around to ensure she was unobserved, then reached into her pocket for the key she had found in Emma's metal box. It slid into the lock smoothly and turned with a soft click. Vivian pushed the door open just enough to slip inside, then closed it quietly behind her. The sunroom was exactly as Charlotte had described, a beautiful space with windows on 3 sides, though the heavy curtains now blocked most of the light. Dust covers shrouded the furniture, giving the room a ghostly, abandoned appearance. The air was stale, untouched by the fresh breezes that routinely circulated through the rest of the house. Vivian moved carefully through the space, lifting dust covers to reveal the contents beneath. A comfortable armchair beside a small table stacked with books, a writing desk with a dried-up inkwell, and a blotter still in place. Bookshelves built into the walls filled with volumes on botany, herbalism, and natural medicine. This was undoubtedly Emma's sanctuary, preserved exactly as she had left it 3 years ago. The thought sent a shiver down Vivian's spine. It was as though the woman might return at any moment to resume her reading or writing, as though time had simply paused in this room rather than moving forward without her. Remembering Emma's instructions, Vivian turned her attention to the bookshelves. There were 4 of them, each filled to capacity. Which one concealed the hidden compartment? And how was it accessed? She examined each shelf carefully, looking for anything unusual. A book that might be a disguised lever, a decorative element that could be a button or switch. On the third bookshelf, she noticed something odd. While the other shelves were packed tightly with books of various sizes, this one had a section where the books were arranged with unusual precision, all exactly the same height, their spines perfectly aligned. Vivian removed these books carefully, setting them aside. Behind where they had stood, the back panel of the bookshelf looked no different from the rest. But when she pressed against it experimentally, she felt a slight give. Encouraged, she ran her fingers along the edges of the panel until she found a small, nearly invisible keyhole. Heart racing, she inserted the key from Emma's box. It turned easily, and the panel swung outward on hidden hinges, revealing a small compartment behind the bookshelf. Inside was a single item, a large envelope yellowed with age, sealed with wax, that had long since hardened and cracked. Across the front, in Emma's elegant handwriting, was written a single word: evidence. Vivian's hands trembled as she carefully broke the seal and opened the envelope. Inside were several documents, what appeared to be financial records, a hand-drawn map with various properties marked and annotated, and a letter on the letterhead of Warner Banking and Trust. She skimmed the contents quickly, struggling to make sense of the technical language and financial terminology. But even with her limited understanding, the implications were clear. Silas Warner had been engaged in a complex scheme involving land acquisition, water rights, and a planned railroad extension. Properties had been purchased through shell companies, often at prices well below market value after their owners experienced mysterious misfortunes, crop failures, livestock deaths, structural damages. The map showed the pattern of acquisitions forming a corridor of land leading directly to the Thornhill Ranch. And the letter signed by Silas himself outlined a strategy for acquiring the final piece, the Thornhill property, by whatever means necessary. Emma had uncovered a conspiracy, one that had likely led to her death when she threatened to expose it. But why hadn't Isaiah pursued the matter after her murder? Had he never found this evidence, or had he been somehow complicit? The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside jolted Vivian from her thoughts. Quickly, she stuffed the documents back into the envelope and returned it to its hiding place, locking the compartment and replacing the books exactly as she had found them. She had just removed the dust cover from a chair and was pretending to examine it when the door opened and Isaiah stepped into the room. His expression when he saw her was one of shock, quickly replaced by something darker: anger or pain or perhaps both. "What are you doing in here?" he demanded, his voice low and tight. Vivian's mind raced for a plausible explanation. "I'm sorry," she said, letting genuine contrition fill her voice. "Charlotte mentioned this room and I was curious. The door was unlocked." The lie came easily necessary to protect her discovery. Isaiah's jaw tightened. "This room is private. It's not part of your domain in this house." The coldness in his tone hurt more than it should have. "I apologize," Vivian said again more softly. "I didn't mean any disrespect. It's just, Charlotte speaks of her mother so often, I wanted to understand more about her." Something in Isaiah's expression shifted at the mention of his daughter. "Charlotte talks about Emma to you," Vivian nodded. "All the time. Small things, mostly. How Emma taught her to press flowers, or the stories she used to read, or the way she talked to her plants in the garden." She gestured around the sunroom. She said this was her mother's favorite place in the house. Isaiah's gaze swept the room, pain evident in every line of his face. "It was," he confirmed quietly. "She spent hours in here reading, writing, watching the light change throughout the day." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I haven't been able to bring myself to come in here since she died. Not until today." The admission caught Vivian by surprise. Why today? He met her eyes, something vulnerable and raw in his gaze. Because of you. The simple statement hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Vivian wasn't sure she understood or wanted to understand. Me. Isaiah moved further into the room, his anger seemingly replaced by a weary sadness. You remind me of her sometimes. Not in appearance, you're nothing alike that way, but in spirit, the way you are with Charlotte, your care with the garden, your quiet determination. He ran a hand along the back of the dust-covered chair. I've been hiding from her memory for 3 years. Perhaps it's time I stopped. Vivian stood motionless, uncertain how to respond to this unexpected vulnerability. The man before her seemed different from the stern, reserved widower she had come to know, more open, more human in his grief. And suddenly, she couldn't bear her deception any longer. Not in this room that had been Emma's sanctuary. Not with this man who was finally allowing himself to feel his loss. Isaiah. She began, his name strange on her tongue despite his permission to use it. There's something I need to tell you. Something important. He looked at her expectantly, unaware of the internal struggle raging within her. Should she tell him everything about Robert, about the watch, about her true reason for coming to the Thornhill Ranch? About the evidence she had just discovered, pointing to Silas Warner as the likely orchestrator of Emma's death. But before she could continue, the moment was shattered by Charlotte's voice calling from the corridor. Miss Gray, Pa? Are you in there? The spell broken. Isaiah moved swiftly to the door, opening it to reveal his daughter, standing in the hallway, her expression curious. What are you both doing in Mama's room? She asked, peering past her father into the dust-shrouded sunroom. Isaiah placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Miss Gray was curious about it, and I was showing her. But we're done now. He glanced back at Vivian. We can continue our conversation later. Vivian nodded, relieved and disappointed in equal measure by the interruption. Of course. As they left the sunroom, Isaiah locked the door behind them, pocketing the key. His eyes met Vivian's briefly, a silent acknowledgement of their interrupted moment and a promise of continuation. Then he turned his attention to Charlotte, asking about her reading lesson as they walked back toward the main part of the house. Vivian followed a few steps behind, her mind churning with all she had learned. Silas Warner had wanted the Thornhill Ranch badly enough to orchestrate a campaign of acquisitions leading to it. Emma had discovered his scheme and had planned to tell Isaiah only to be killed before she could do so. But why hadn't Isaiah found the evidence himself? Surely he would have searched Emma's belongings after her death, especially if she had hinted at having important information to share with him. And if he had found it, why hadn't he acted on it? Why was Silas still a free man, still apparently respected in the community, still visiting the Thornhill Ranch as though he were a friend of the family? Something wasn't adding up, and Vivian was determined to understand what it was before she revealed her own secrets to Isaiah Thornhill. For now, though, she would keep her discoveries to herself. She would watch and wait, gather more information, try to understand the complex web of relationships and motivations that had led to Emma's death and Robert's wrongful execution. And perhaps in the process, she would come to understand her own increasingly complicated feelings for the man whose wife's death had brought her to this place, and for the child who spoke to ghosts in the night. The next few days passed in a blur of activity as the ranch recovered from the flood. The road to town remained impassable, isolating the Thornhill property from Creswell and delaying Vivian's plans to gather more information about Silas Warner and his land scheme. Isaiah was absent for much of each day, supervising repairs and working alongside his men to restore fences, clear debris, and salvage what could be saved from the flooded outbuildings. He returned each evening, exhausted, his clothes mud-stained, his hands raw from labor. The promised continuation of their conversation in the sunroom never materialized. Whether this was due to Isaiah's physical exhaustion or a deliberate avoidance of the subject, Vivian couldn't be sure. But she felt a subtle shift in their interactions nonetheless, a new awareness, a careful dance around unspoken words and feelings. For her part, Vivian was equally conflicted. The evidence she had discovered in Emma's hiding place had only complicated her understanding of the situation. She found herself watching Isaiah closely, searching for any sign that he might know more about his wife's death than he had revealed. But all she saw was a man consumed by the immediate demands of his ranch and the ongoing pain of his loss. Charlotte, meanwhile, seemed to blossom under Vivian's care. With her father busy and her usual activities curtailed by the flood damage, the girl spent most of her time in the kitchen, helping with meals and learning to bake. She chattered constantly, sharing stories about her mother, her friends in town, her dreams of someday having a horse farm of her own. "Mama said I have a natural way with animals," she informed Vivian as they prepared dinner on the third evening after the flood. "She said it's a gift to understand creatures that can't speak our language." "Your mother was right," Vivian agreed, having observed Charlotte's gentle handling of the barn cats and her easy rapport with the horses. "It is a special gift." Charlotte beamed at the praise. "Pa says I get it from her. She could make anything grow, and the wild birds would eat from her hand." Her expression grew thoughtful. "Do you think she can still talk to animals in heaven?" The question, delivered with such innocent curiosity, caught Vivian off guard. I'm not sure, Charlotte. But I like to think that the things that make us special stay with us wherever we go." Charlotte considered this, nodding slowly. "That makes sense. Mama's probably got the most beautiful garden in heaven then." She sprinkled flour on the countertop for rolling out pie dough. "And she's watching over us. She told me so." Vivian had grown accustomed to Charlotte's matter-of-fact references to conversations with her dead mother, but they still sent a chill through her at times. "In your dreams?" she asked carefully. Charlotte shook her head. "No, when I talk to her at night. She doesn't come every night, but when she does, she tells me things." "What kind of things?" Vivian kept her tone casual, though her heart had begun to race. "Just things." Charlotte seemed suddenly evasive, concentrating intently on rolling out the dough. "Private things. Between me and Mama." Vivian decided not to press further. Whatever comfort the child found in these imaginary conversations, it wasn't her place to disrupt it. Yet, she couldn't help wondering if Charlotte's conversations with Emma were entirely fabricated, or if they might contain elements of real memories, perhaps things Emma had told her daughter before her death, now emerging in this form. The sound of boots in the mudroom interrupted her thoughts. Isaiah entered the kitchen, looking even more worn than usual, his face etched with lines of fatigue. "Pa!" Charlotte abandoned her pie dough to run to him. "We're making chicken pot pie for dinner, and I rolled the dough all by myself." Isaiah managed a tired smile, lifting his daughter for a quick embrace, despite his muddy clothes. "That's wonderful, Charlie. I'm sure it will be delicious." He set her down gently. "I need to clean up before dinner. I'm afraid I've brought half the creek bed in with me." "I'll have everything ready in half an hour," Vivian assured him. "Take your time." He nodded gratefully and headed upstairs, moving with the careful deliberation of a man pushing himself beyond exhaustion. Charlotte watched him go, her expression concerned. "Pa works too hard," she observed with adult solemnity. "Mama always said so." "He's trying to protect what's important to him," Vivian said, understanding Isaiah's drive all too well. "This ranch is your family's legacy." "I know." Charlotte returned to her pie dough. But Mama said the ranch isn't worth Pa working himself to death. She said people matter more than land or money. The girl looked up at Vivian, her gray eyes serious. That's why she was going to tell Pa about the bad man's plans. Because people matter more. Vivian's hands stilled on the chicken she was dicing. The bad man's plans. What bad man? Charlotte. Charlotte's expression closed off, as though she suddenly realized she had said too much. I don't remember, she said too quickly to be believable. It was a long time ago. Charlotte, Vivian said gently, crouching down to meet the girl at eye level. If you know something about what happened to your mother, it's important to share it. It could help make sure the bad man can't hurt anyone else. Charlotte bit her lip, clearly torn between keeping what she saw as a secret and the desire to do what was right. I promised Mama I wouldn't tell, she whispered finally. She said it was dangerous, and I had to keep quiet to stay safe. The implications of this statement sent a chill through Vivian. Had Emma confided in her 4-year-old daughter about the evidence she had discovered? Had she sworn the child to secrecy for her own protection? Your mother was very wise to want to keep you safe, Vivian said carefully. But sometimes when enough time has passed, it becomes safe to share secrets, especially with people who want to help. Charlotte studied Vivian's face intently, as though searching for something specific. Do you want to help? Really help? Yes, Vivian said with complete honesty. I want to help you and your father, and I want to help make sure your mother's memory is honored properly. Charlotte seemed to come to a decision. She glanced toward the stairs to ensure Isaiah wasn't returning, then leaned in close to Vivian's ear. Mr. Warner is the bad man, she whispered. He wanted our ranch, and he got mad when Mama said no. I heard them fighting in the garden. He said she would be sorry, and then, her voice faltered. Then she died. But Pa doesn't know it was Mr. Warner. No one believes me, because I was little when it happened. Vivian's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't just a child's fantasy or misremembered conversation. This was a potential eyewitness account of events leading directly to Emma's murder. You saw Mr. Warner arguing with your mother. When was this, Charlotte? The day before she died. Charlotte replied, her voice small but certain. I was playing hide-and-seek with my doll in the garden. They didn't see me behind the big rosemary bush. Mr. Warner was very angry. His face was all red, and he pointed his finger at Mama like this. She demonstrated, jabbing her small finger forward aggressively. He said she would regret interfering in his business. Mama wasn't scared, though. She told him she had evidence, and she was going to the sheriff. This aligned perfectly with what Vivian had read in Emma's journal. Her decision to come forward with the evidence she had gathered made the day before her death. But according to the journal, Emma had planned to tell Isaiah first. Had she confronted Silas instead? Or had he somehow learned of her intentions and confronted her? Did you tell your father about this conversation? Vivian asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Charlotte shook her head. I tried right after Mama died, but he was so sad. And he said I was confused, that I was making up stories to explain what happened. Her lower lip trembled slightly. He said sometimes bad things just happen, and there's no one to blame. But he was wrong. It was Mr. Warner. I know it was. Oh, Charlotte, Vivian said softly, her heart breaking for the child who had carried this burden for 3 years unheard and disbelieved. I believe you. Charlotte's eyes widened. You do? Yes, Vivian confirmed. And I think it's very brave of you to tell me. But we need to be careful about what we do next. Mr. Warner is a powerful man, and if he is responsible for what happened to your mother, he might still be dangerous. Charlotte nodded solemnly. That's what Mama says, too, in our talks. She says to be patient, that the truth will come out when the time is right. The girl looked at Vivian with sudden intensity. Is the time right now? Is that why you came here? The question, so direct, and yet so complex, left Vivian momentarily speechless. How could she explain to this child that she had come seeking justice for her brother, only to find herself entangled in a much larger web of deception and danger? I think, she said carefully, that the time is getting closer, but we still need to be careful. For now this stays between us. Can you promise me that no telling your father or anyone else until I say it's safe? Charlotte nodded, her expression grave beyond her years. I promise. Pinky, swear. She held out her small finger. Vivian linked her own finger with Charlotte's, sealing the pact. Pinky, swear. As they returned to their dinner preparations, Vivian's mind raced with the implications of Charlotte's revelation. She now had 3 pieces of evidence pointing to Silas Warner as Emma's killer: the financial documents showing his scheme to acquire the Thornhill Ranch, Emma's journal entries documenting her discovery of this plot, and now Charlotte's eyewitness account of a threatening confrontation the day before Emma's death. What she still didn't understand was why Isaiah had dismissed his daughter's account, why he continued to tolerate Silas's presence in their lives, why he had apparently never discovered or acted upon the evidence Emma had gathered, unless he had reasons of his own for keeping silent. Financial entanglements, perhaps, or some form of blackmail or coercion, or something darker, more unthinkable, complicity in his wife's death. No, Vivian couldn't bring herself to believe that. Not the man who looked at his daughter with such tenderness, who worked himself to exhaustion to preserve his family's legacy, who still grieved so deeply for his lost wife that he couldn't bear to enter her favorite room. There had to be another explanation, and Vivian was determined to find it for Charlotte's sake, for Robert's memory, and increasingly for her own peace of mind. Because somewhere along the way, between the garden and the kitchen and the quiet conversations by lamplight, Vivian Gray had begun to care for the Thornhills not just as a means to an end, but as people who had worked their way into her heart, despite all her efforts to remain detached. And that caring would make what came next, the revelations, the confrontations, the inevitable pain of truth, all the harder to bear. The road to town reopened 5 days after the flood, when the creek finally receded enough for passage. Isaiah announced the news at breakfast, his expression a mixture of relief and something else Vivian couldn't quite identify. Reluctance, perhaps, as though the reconnection to the outside world marked the end of something precious. Charlotte can resume her lessons with Miss Abernathy tomorrow, he said, buttering a slice of Vivian's freshly baked bread. And I imagine you'll be glad to replenish your kitchen supplies, Vivian. Yes, she agreed, though in truth she had rather enjoyed the isolation of the past days, the intimate routine that had developed among the 3 of them. I'll make a list of what we need. Can Miss Gray come with me to town party? Charlotte asked, looking up from her oatmeal. She's never been to Simmons's store, and they have the prettiest fabric for dresses. Isaiah glanced at Vivian, a question in his eyes. Would you like that? A trip to town might be a welcome change after being cooped up here. I would actually, Vivian replied, seeing an opportunity to gather more information about Silas Warner. If you can spare me for a few hours. Consider it your reward for keeping us so well fed during the flood, Isaiah said, with a small smile. Take the wagon. Dawson can drive you both and bring back the supplies we need for the ranch while you explore the metropolis of Creswell. His tone was dry, but the humor reached his eyes, softening his usual stern demeanor. Charlotte clapped her hands in delight. We can have lunch at the hotel. They make lemon cakes on Thursdays. The prospect of a day in town with Charlotte brought a genuine smile to Vivian's face. Despite the seriousness of her mission and the growing complexity of the situation, she had come to treasure her time with the precocious child. "Lemon cakes sound wonderful," she agreed. Isaiah watched their exchange, something wistful in his expression. "You'll need to leave early to make the most of the day," he said, rising from the table. "I'll tell Dawson to have the wagon ready by 8. After he left for his morning rounds of the ranch, Charlotte turned to Vivian with barely contained excitement. "Can we get ribbon for my hair? And maybe some candy from Mr. Peterson's shop?" "We'll see," Vivian said, amused by the girl's enthusiasm. "Let's make our list of necessities first, then we'll consider treats." As they cleared the breakfast table together, Vivian's mind turned to her plans for the day in town. She needed to learn more about Silas Warner, his background, his business dealings, his connection to the Thornhill family beyond what she already knew. Martha Simmons at the general store seemed the most likely source of local gossip, but Vivian would need to be careful in her questioning to avoid arousing suspicion. And then there was the matter of the pocket watch. She had kept it hidden beneath her floorboard all this time, taking it out occasionally to examine it to remind herself of her purpose here. Should she bring it with her to town? The thought of leaving it unattended at the ranch made her uneasy, yet carrying it with her felt equally risky. In the end, she decided to bring it, securing it in the hidden pocket of her petticoat where it had traveled all the way from St. Louis. Whatever information she gathered in town would determine her next steps, and she might need the watch as evidence or leverage. The morning passed quickly in preparations for their excursion. By 8 o'clock, Vivian and Charlotte were seated in the wagon beside Dawson, a taciturn ranch hand with a graying beard who had worked for the Thornhill family since Isaiah was a boy. "Mind your back before dark," Isaiah said, as he helped them into the wagon. "The road's still rough in places." "We will be, pa-ha," Charlotte promised, her excitement making her practically bounce on the seat. "Don't worry," Isaiah's hand lingered on his daughter's shoulder. "Be good for Miss Gray. No wandering off on your own." "I'll keep her close," Vivian assured him, touched by his protective concern. It was one more piece of evidence against the terrible suspicion that had crossed her mind that Isaiah might somehow have been involved in Emma's death. A man who worried so much about his daughter's safety, even on a simple trip to town, could not be the same man who would conspire in her mother's murder. Could he? The doubt lingered as they set off down the muddy road toward Cresswell, Charlotte chattering happily beside her about all the people they would see and things they would do. Vivian pushed the troubling thoughts aside, determined to focus on the task at hand, gathering information that might finally reveal the truth about Emma Thornhill's death and clear Robert's name. The journey to town took longer than usual due to the condition of the road, but by mid-morning they were rattling down Cresswell's main street. The small frontier town looked much as it had when Vivian first arrived, though with more activity now as residents went about repairing flood damage to shops and homes. "We'll meet you back here at 3 o'clock, Vivian told Dawson as he let them down in front of Simmons' general store. "Will that give you enough time to collect the ranch supplies?" The old cowboy nodded. "Plenty. You ladies enjoy your day." With a tip of his hat, he drove off toward the feed store at the end of the street. Charlotte immediately took Vivian's hand, tugging her toward the general store. "Come on, Mrs. Simmons always has candy sticks for children, and she knows all the best gossip." Vivian allowed herself to be led inside the bell above the door, announcing their arrival. The store was much as she remembered it from her first day in Cresswell, shelves stocked with dry goods, fabrics, household items, and the sundry necessities of frontier life. Martha Simmons looked up from behind the counter, her round face breaking into a smile at the sight of them. "Well, look who's here, little Miss Thornhill and our new cook from the big city." She came around the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "How did you folks fare in the flood? We heard the creek took out part of your east pasture." "It did," Charlotte confirmed importantly. "But Pa and the men fixed the fences, and none of the animals were hurt. And Miss Gray made the best chicken pot pie for everyone who helped." Martha chuckled at the child's earnestness. "Did she now? Well, you're lucky to have found such a fine cook." She turned to Vivian. "And how are you settling in, dear? I hear from Dawson that you've been working wonders with poor Emma's herb garden." "It's been a rewarding project," Vivian replied, pleased that Martha had introduced the topic of Emma so naturally. "Charlotte has been telling me all about her mother's knowledge of plants." "Oh, Emma was something special with those herbs," Martha agreed, leading them deeper into the store. "Could tell you the medicinal properties of every weed that grew on the prairie. Helped a lot of folks around here with her remedies." She lowered her voice slightly. "Some said she had the sight, too. Could sense when trouble was coming." Charlotte, who had wandered over to examine a display of colorful hair ribbons, didn't appear to hear this last comment. Vivian seized the opportunity to probe further. "Really? What kind of trouble?" Martha shrugged. "Oh, bad weather, illness, that sort of thing. Had a knack for showing up with the right remedy just when someone came down sick." She reached into a jar on the counter and extracted a red and white striped candy stick, which she handed to Charlotte. "Here you go, sweetheart. A special treat for our favorite customer." Charlotte accepted the candy with a delighted, "Thank you," and immediately unwrapped it. "Don't spoil your lunch," Vivian cautioned gently, before turning back to Martha. "We're actually hoping to have lunch at the hotel." "Is the restaurant still serving those lemon cakes Charlotte mentioned?" "Every Thursday, regular as clockwork," Martha confirmed. "Though you might want to avoid it today if you're not looking for company. The bank is hosting some railroad men for lunch, some big meeting about the new spur line they're planning. Silas Warner's been crowing about it for weeks." Vivian's interest sharpened at the mention of Warner and railroads. "A new railroad spur coming through Cresswell." Martha nodded, leaning in conspiratorially. "That's the talk. Would put us on the map proper. Bring in business." Silas has been buying up land along the proposed route for years, quietly through various companies, thinking no one noticed. But in a town this size, folks notice everything. She chuckled. "He'll make a fortune when the railroad pays for the right-of-way." This aligned perfectly with the evidence Vivian had found in Emma's hiding place, documents showing Warner's systematic acquisition of properties leading to the Thornhill Ranch. But Martha's casual mention of it suggested this wasn't a secret plot, but common knowledge in town. "That sounds like a smart business strategy," Vivian commented, keeping her tone neutral. "Has he approached the Thornhill Ranch as well? It seems like prime property." Martha's expression shifted subtly. "Oh, he's tried. First approached Isaiah right after Emma died, if you can believe the nerve. Offered to buy the whole spread to ease his burden as a widower. Isaiah threw him off the property." She shook her head in disapproval. "Silas has always had his eye on that land, even back when old Doc Thornhill was alive. Made an offer to Emma once, too, before she married Isaiah. Thought he could get the land by getting the girl, if you follow my meaning." This was new information, a personal connection between Silas and Emma that predated her marriage to Isaiah. "Emma turned him down?" Vivian asked, careful to keep her voice casual despite her racing pulse. "Emphatically," Martha confirmed with a chuckle. "Emma had no interest in Silas Warner or his money. She was already sweet on Isaiah by then, though he was too dense to notice for the longest time." Her expression softened with nostalgia. "Those two were meant for each other plain as day, to everyone but themselves." Charlotte wandered back over her candy stick, half consumed. "Are you talking about Mama and Pa? Mama said he was the handsomest man in 3 counties, but so stubborn she had to practically propose to him herself." Martha laughed outright at this. She wasn't wrong. Your father was always slow to act where his heart was concerned. She gave Vivian a significant look that made her cheeks warm inexplicably. Some men need a push in the right direction. Before Vivian could respond to this rather pointed observation, the bell above the door jangled, and a familiar figure entered the store, Silas Warner himself, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit, despite the frontier setting, his silver-templed hair neatly combed. Charlotte immediately stiffened beside Vivian, pressing closer to her side. Vivian placed a protective hand on the girl's shoulder, feeling her tremble slightly beneath her touch. "Ah, Mrs. Simmons," Silas called jovially as he approached the counter. "I hope you have those cigars I ordered from Denver. My guests from the railroad are—" He broke off as he noticed Vivian and Charlotte. "Well, what a pleasant surprise. Miss Gray and young Miss Thornhill. I didn't realize you ladies had ventured into town today." "The road just reopened," Vivian explained, keeping her tone polite but cool. "We needed supplies after the flood." Silas's gaze lingered on her face, a moment too long, before shifting to Charlotte, who was now partially hiding behind Vivian's skirts. "And how are you, my dear, enjoying your candy, I see?" Charlotte didn't answer, just stared at him with undisguised wariness. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Vivian broke it. "We should continue our shopping, Mr. Warner. I'm sure you have business to attend to with your railroad guests." Something flickered in Silas's eyes, annoyance perhaps at her dismissive tone, but his smile remained fixed in place. "Indeed I do. A momentous day for Cresswell. Perhaps you'll join us for lunch at the hotel. I'd be happy to introduce you to some very important gentlemen from the Eastern Central Railroad." "Thank you, but we've made other plans," Vivian replied smoothly. "Another time, perhaps." Silas inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Of course. Please give my regards to Isaiah. Tell him I'll be stopping by the ranch soon to discuss a proposition that might interest him greatly." He turned back to Martha. "Those cigars, Mrs. Simmons." As Martha bustled off to retrieve Silas's order, Vivian took the opportunity to guide Charlotte toward the fabric section of the store, putting some distance between them and the banker. "Are you all right?" she asked softly, noting the girl's pale face. Charlotte nodded, though her grip on Vivian's hand remained tight. "I don't like him," she whispered. "He pretends to be nice, but his eyes are cold, like a snake's." The description, delivered with a child's brutal honesty, struck Vivian as remarkably apt. There was something reptilian about Silas Warner's calculating gaze, his too-smooth manner. "We don't have to stay near him," she assured Charlotte. "Let's look at those ribbons you were admiring." They spent the next several minutes examining the store's selection of hair accessories, keeping one eye on Silas as he completed his transaction with Martha. Only when he had left the store, cigars in hand, did Charlotte fully relax. "We should warn Pa," she said, suddenly looking up at Vivian with serious eyes. "Mr. Warner said he's coming to the ranch with a proposition. That means trouble." Vivian squeezed the girl's hand reassuringly. "We'll tell him as soon as we get home. But first, let's finish our shopping and have that lunch you were looking forward to." They selected several ribbons for Charlotte's hair and a few yards of calico fabric that Vivian thought might make a nice new dress for the girl. As they made their purchases, Vivian casually inquired about the location of the town records office. "Planning to research local history, are you?" Martha asked with raised eyebrows. "Something like that," Vivian replied vaguely. "I've always been interested in how frontier towns develop." Martha seemed to accept this explanation. "Town Hall end of Main Street. Records office is on the second floor. Though I should warn you, our record-keeping has been spotty over the years. Fires, floods, and general frontier chaos have taken their toll." Armed with this information and their purchases, Vivian and Charlotte left the general store and made their way to the small hotel restaurant for lunch. They deliberately chose a table far from the private dining room where Silas was entertaining his railroad guests, though they could still hear the occasional burst of laughter and clinking of glasses from behind the closed door. "Are they celebrating because they're going to build a railroad through Cresswell?" Charlotte asked, as she carefully cut her chicken into small, neat pieces. "It seems so," Vivian replied, impressed by the girl's perception. "A railroad connection would mean a lot for a small town like this. More business, more people, more prosperity." Charlotte considered this as she chewed. "Would it go through our ranch?" she asked finally. "I don't know," Vivian admitted. "But from what Mrs. Simmons said, Mr. Warner has been buying land that might be on the railroad's path, and he seems interested in your father's property." "He's always wanted our ranch," Charlotte said matter-of-factly. "Mama said it was because of the water rights. Our creek is the most reliable water source for miles, even when it floods. And water is more valuable than gold out here." Once again, Vivian was struck by the child's precocious understanding of adult matters. "Your mother taught you a lot about such things." Charlotte nodded. "She said a woman should understand business and property just as well as a man. That way no one can take advantage of you." She looked down at her plate, pushing a piece of chicken around with her fork. "She was teaching me about the plants, too, before she died. She said, knowledge is power, especially for women." "She sounds like a remarkable person," Vivian said softly. "I wish I could have met her." "Me too," Charlotte whispered, a catch in her voice. Then, with the resilience of childhood, she brightened. "Can we have lemon cake now? They're really good here." After lunch, Vivian suggested they visit the town hall before continuing their shopping. Charlotte seemed puzzled by this detour, but didn't object, trailing along beside Vivian as they made their way to the imposing brick building at the end of Main Street. The records office was a dusty, cramped room with filing cabinets lining the walls, and a single clerk dozing at a desk near the window. He startled awake at their entrance, adjusting his spectacles and smoothing his rumpled vest. "Can I help you, ladies?" he asked, his voice creaky with disuse. "I hope so," Vivian replied with her most charming smile. "I'm interested in property records for Cresswell and the surrounding area, specifically transactions over the past 5 years or so." The clerk looked bewildered by this request. "Property records? That's an unusual interest for a lady." "I'm considering an investment in the area," Vivian improvised. "With the railroad coming, it seems like an opportune time." This explanation seemed to satisfy the clerk. "Well, the deed books are over there." He gestured toward a shelf of large leather-bound volumes. "Organized by year. Help yourself, but please be careful with them. Some of those pages are brittle with age." Vivian approached the shelf, Charlotte trailing behind her curiously. "What are we looking for?" the girl whispered. "Information," Vivian whispered back. "About Mr. Warner and the land he's been buying." They spent the next hour poring over deed records, with Vivian taking careful notes in a small notebook she had brought along. The pattern that emerged confirmed what she had already suspected from Emma's documents. Over the past 6 years, Silas Warner, through various shell companies and proxies, had systematically acquired properties forming a corridor from the existing railroad line 20 miles south of Creswell to the edge of the Thornhill Ranch. Most interestingly, his acquisitions had accelerated dramatically in the months following Emma's death, as though her absence had removed an obstacle to his plans. And in several cases, the sales had occurred under distressed circumstances, foreclosures, tax delinquencies, or sudden financial hardships that forced owners to sell at below-market prices. It was exactly the pattern documented in Emma's hidden evidence, but seeing it laid out in the official records made it more concrete, more undeniable. Silas Warner had been orchestrating a land grab with the Thornhill Ranch as his ultimate target, and Emma had discovered his scheme. But why hadn't Isaiah acted on this information after his wife's death? The question continued to trouble Vivian as they left the records office and resumed their shopping. Either he had never found Emma's evidence, or he had reasons of his own for keeping silent about Warner's activities. As they walked back toward the general store to meet Dawson, Charlotte tugged on Vivian's hand. "Look," she whispered, pointing across the street. "Mr. Warner and those men from the railroad. They're coming this way." Vivian glanced in the direction Charlotte indicated and saw Silas emerging from the hotel accompanied by 3 well-dressed men who were clearly not locals. They were engaged in animated conversation with Silas, gesturing expansively as though describing grand visions for the future. "Let's cross to the other side," Vivian suggested, not wanting another encounter with the banker. But before they could move, Silas spotted them and raised his hand in greeting. "Miss Gray Charlotte, allow me to introduce you to our distinguished visitors." Trapped by social convention, Vivian forced a polite smile as Silas and his companions approached. Charlotte pressed against her side, her small body tense. "Gentlemen, this is Miss Vivian Gray, cook at the Thornhill Ranch, and Miss Charlotte Thornhill, daughter of Isaiah Thornhill, whose property we were just discussing." Silas announced, his tone jovial, but his eyes sharp. "Ladies, may I present Mr. Hamilton, Mr. Deering, and Mr. Farnsworth of the Eastern Central Railroad." The men tipped their hats politely, though their gazes held the calculating assessment of businessmen rather than genuine warmth. "A pleasure, Miss Gray, Miss Thornhill," said the eldest, a portly man with mutton-chop whiskers, who had been introduced as Hamilton. "Your father owns quite a substantial property, young lady. Prime land for our purposes." Charlotte said nothing, just stared at the man with undisguised suspicion. Vivian placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "Yes, the Thornhill Ranch has been in the family for generations," she said smoothly. "Isaiah is very proud of its legacy." "Legacy is all well and good," said the man called Deering, a thin, sharp-featured individual with cold eyes. "But progress waits for no man. The railroad is coming to Cresswell, and those who cooperate will prosper. Those who resist—" he shrugged eloquently. "Isaiah Thornhill is a reasonable man," Silas interjected quickly. "Once he understands the full scope of our proposal, I'm confident he'll see the benefits of cooperation. And if he doesn't," Vivian couldn't help asking, though she kept her tone light as though merely curious. Silas's smile didn't reach his eyes. "There are always ways to persuade reluctant sellers, Miss Gray. The railroad has certain legal options at its disposal." "Eminent domain," Hamilton explained clearly, enjoying the sound of his own voice. "The greater good of commerce and national expansion takes precedence over individual property rights. It's enshrined in law." "How fascinating," Vivian replied, her mind racing with the implications. This was Warner's endgame, to use the railroad's power of eminent domain to force Isaiah to sell, if he couldn't be persuaded willingly. "I'm sure Mr. Thornhill will be interested to hear all about it when you visit the ranch." "Indeed he will," Silas agreed, his gaze lingering on Vivian with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "In fact, we plan to ride out tomorrow morning to present our proposal formally." "Then we won't keep you gentlemen any longer," Vivian said, beginning to steer Charlotte away. "We have our own errands to complete before returning to the ranch." "One moment, Miss Gray," Silas called, causing her to pause reluctantly. "I couldn't help but notice you spent quite some time in the town records office earlier. Researching property deeds, I understand. I wonder what sparked that particular interest." The question was delivered casually, but Vivian felt its dangerous undertone. Silas had been watching her movements in town, perhaps even had informants reporting to him. She kept her expression neutral. Just curiosity about local history. This is my first time in Wyoming after all. Curiosity, Silas repeated, his smile tight. A dangerous trait in a cook, wouldn't you say? It might lead you into areas beyond your expertise. The veiled threat hung in the air between them. Vivian met his gaze steadily. I find that understanding the communities where I live enriches my experience, Mr. Warner. Wouldn't you agree? Before he could respond, Charlotte spoke up unexpectedly. We need to go, she announced, her voice clear and firm despite her obvious fear of the man. Dawson is waiting for us, and Pa will worry if we're late. Vivian squeezed the girl's shoulder in silent approval of her intervention. Charlotte's right. Good day, gentlemen. I'm sure we'll meet again soon. As they walked away, Vivian could feel Silas's gaze burning into her back. She had revealed too much, shown too much interest in his affairs. He would be suspicious now, perhaps even see her as a threat to his plans. He knows, Charlotte whispered once they were out of earshot. He knows you're looking into what happened to Mama. Vivian glanced down at the perceptive child in surprise. What makes you say that? His eyes, Charlotte replied simply. They got angry when he talked about you being curious, the same way they looked when he argued with Mama in the garden. She shuddered slightly. We need to tell Pa tonight before Mr. Warner comes tomorrow. Vivian couldn't disagree with this assessment. Whatever her original plans had been for revealing the truth, gradually circumstances had forced her hand. Silas Warner was moving forward with his railroad scheme, and Isaiah needed to be warned about both the immediate threat to his property and the connection to Emma's death, which meant she would also have to reveal her own deception, her true identity, her relationship to Robert, her possession of the watch that had sent her brother to the gallows. The thought made her stomach clench with anxiety, but there was no avoiding it now. Too much was at stake. You're right, she told Charlotte as they hurried toward their meeting point with Dawson. Tonight, we'll tell your father everything we know. The return journey to the ranch was tense, with Charlotte unusually quiet, and Vivian lost in thought, planning what she would say to Isaiah. Dawson, perceptive despite his taciturn nature, seemed to sense their mood and refrained from his usual sparse commentary on the passing landscape. They arrived back at the ranch in late afternoon, the sun still high in the clear sky. Isaiah was nowhere to be seen, out checking the repaired fences with the ranch hands, according to the housekeeper who helped them unload their purchases. He said to tell you he'd be back for supper, the woman added. Wants to hear all about your day in town. He certainly will, Charlotte murmured under her breath, earning a warning glance from Vivian. They busied themselves with putting away the supplies and preparing dinner, a simple meal of roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread. Vivian moved through these familiar tasks mechanically, her mind elsewhere rehearsing the words she would use to tell Isaiah about Silas's plans, about Emma's evidence, about her own true identity. Every scenario she imagined ended with his anger and sense of betrayal. How could it not? She had entered his home under false pretenses, gained his trust, perhaps even his affection, while harboring secrets that would cause him pain. Yet there was no choice now but to proceed with the truth, whatever the consequences. The sun was setting when they heard Isaiah's horse in the yard. Charlotte, who had been setting the table, looked up at Vivian with wide, nervous eyes. Are we going to tell him now? After dinner, Vivian decided, let's have one more peaceful meal together before everything changes. Charlotte nodded, understanding far more than a child her age should. He'll be angry at first, she said with surprising insight. But Pa is fair. Once he understands why you came here, he'll forgive you. Vivian wished she shared the girl's confidence. We'll see, she said softly, turning back to the stove as Isaiah's boots sounded on the porch steps. Dinner was a strained affair despite their attempts at normalcy. Isaiah, tired from his day's work, but pleased with the progress of repairs on the ranch, initially carried the conversation asking about their trip to town and commenting on Charlotte's new hair ribbons. But he gradually fell silent as he noted their subdued responses and exchange of meaningful glances. "All right," he said, finally setting down his fork. "What's going on? You two have been acting strange since I got home. Did something happen in town?" Vivian exchanged a look with Charlotte, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes," she admitted, meeting Isaiah's concerned gaze. "Something did happen. We ran into Silas Warner and some men from the Eastern Central Railroad." Isaiah's expression darkened immediately. "Warner, what did he want?" "He introduced us to the railroad men," Vivian explained. "They're planning a spur line through Cresswell, and they want your land for the right-of-way. Warner said they're coming to the ranch tomorrow to present a formal proposal." "Damn his eyes," Isaiah muttered, then glanced apologetically at Charlotte. "Sorry, sweetheart, but this isn't the first time Warner has tried to get his hands on our land. I'm not surprised he's using the railroad as his latest excuse." "It's more than that," Vivian said carefully. "From what the railroad men said, if you refuse to sell, they plan to use eminent domain to force the issue." Isaiah's jaw tightened. "Let them try. This land has been in my family for 3 generations. I won't give it up without a fight." "Pa," Charlotte interjected, her voice small but determined. "There's more. It's about Mama, and why Mr. Warner wants our ranch so badly." Isaiah went very still, his gaze shifting from his daughter to Vivian and back again. "What about your mother, Charlotte?" The girl looked to Vivian for support before continuing. "Remember when I told you I saw Mr. Warner arguing with Mama in the garden the day before she died? You said I was confused, that I was making up stories because I was sad." A shadow of old pain crossed Isaiah's face. "Charlotte, we've discussed this." "I wasn't confused, Pa." Charlotte interrupted, an unusual defiance in her tone. "I wasn't making it up. I really did see them arguing. Mr. Warner was very angry because Mama had found out about his plan to take our ranch for the railroad. She threatened to expose him, and the next day she was dead." Isaiah's face had gone pale. "Charlotte, that's enough. You don't understand what you're saying." "But I do," the girl insisted. "And Miss Gray believes me. She found Mama's journal in the garden, and the evidence Mama hid in her sunroom." Isaiah's gaze snapped to Vivian, shock and betrayal written clearly on his features. "You what?" Vivian took a deep breath, knowing there was no turning back now. "It's true. I found a metal box buried in the garden beneath a stone marked Remember. It contained Emma's journal and a key to a hidden compartment in her reading room." She met his gaze steadily. The journal detailed her discovery of Warner's land acquisition scheme and her plan to tell you about it the day before she died. The hidden compartment contained documents proving that Warner has been systematically buying properties along a corridor leading to your ranch, often through coercive means. Isaiah stood abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor. "You had no right," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "No right to invade my wife's private spaces, to read her journal, to involve my daughter in these conspiracy theories." "They're not theories, Pa," Charlotte protested, tears welling in her eyes. "They're true. Mr. Warner killed Mama because she was going to stop him from taking our ranch." "That's enough." Isaiah's voice rose, making Charlotte flinch. Seeing her reaction, he visibly struggled to control himself. "Charlotte, go to your room. I need to speak with Miss Gray alone." "But Pa—" "Now, Charlotte." The girl looked to Vivian, who nodded reassuringly. "It's all right. Go on upstairs. Your father and I need to talk." Reluctantly, Charlotte slid from her chair and left the dining room. Her small shoulders slumped in defeat. When they heard her footsteps on the stairs, Isaiah turned to Vivian, his expression a mixture of anger and pain. "Explain yourself," he demanded. "What gave you the right to pry into my wife's private affairs, to fill my daughter's head with these delusions about her mother's death?" Vivian knew the moment had come to reveal everything. She reached into her pocket and withdrew the gold pocket watch, placing it on the table between them. "Because I have a personal stake in learning the truth about Emma's death," she said quietly. "My real name is Harriet Foster. Robert Foster, the man hanged for your wife's murder, was my brother." Isaiah stared at the watch, his face draining of color. "Where did you get that?" he whispered. "From Robert before he died," Vivian replied. "He found it by the creek near where Emma's body was discovered. He picked it up intending to turn it in, but before he could, he was arrested and charged with her murder." She swallowed hard, fighting back tears at the memory. "He swore he was innocent, that he had nothing to do with Emma's death. I believed him, but no one else did. The watch was the evidence that condemned him." Isaiah sank back into his chair, his eyes never leaving the watch. "You came here under false pretenses," he said, his voice hollow. "You lied about who you were, about your purpose." "Yes," Vivian admitted. "I came to find the truth about Emma's death and clear my brother's name. But I never expected to find what I did, evidence pointing to Silas Warner as the real killer, motivated by his determination to acquire your ranch for the railroad right-of-way. And you believe Charlotte saw Warner arguing with Emma the day before she died." "I do," Vivian said firmly. "Children that age don't fabricate specific details like that, and her account aligns perfectly with what Emma wrote in her journal about her plan to confront him with the evidence she had gathered." Isaiah buried his face in his hands, his broad shoulders slumping with the weight of this revelation. "I didn't believe her," he said, his voice muffled. "My own daughter told me what she saw, and I dismissed it as a child's fantasy, because it was easier than considering the alternative that Emma's death wasn't a random act of violence, but a deliberate murder." "You couldn't have known," Vivian said gently. "Emma kept her investigation into Warner's activities secret, even from you, until the very end. She wrote that she was planning to tell you everything the day before she died. But something must have happened. Perhaps Warner confronted her first, as Charlotte witnessed." Isaiah looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "Why wouldn't she have told me earlier? We didn't keep secrets from each other." "She wrote that she wanted to gather all the evidence first," Vivian explained, "to be absolutely certain before making such serious accusations against a prominent citizen." She hesitated, then added softly, "And perhaps she wanted to protect you and Charlotte. Warner is a dangerous man with powerful connections." Isaiah reached for the pocket watch, cradling it in his palm as though it were a living thing. "I gave this to Emma on our 5th anniversary," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Had it specially made in Denver. She always carried it." He opened it, revealing the inscription inside, "To Emma, my North Star. Forever IT." In her journal, she wrote that she held it when she was afraid, Vivian told him. That it reminded her of your love gave her courage. A single tear slid down Isaiah's cheek, falling onto the gleaming surface of the watch. He wiped it away with his thumb, then closed the watch and set it down carefully. "All this time," he said, more to himself than to Vivian, "all this time, I've been living next door to my wife's killer, tolerating his presence in my home, in my daughter's life." His hand clenched into a fist on the table, "while an innocent man went to the gallows." "You couldn't have known," Vivian repeated, aching to reach out to him but restraining herself. Warner created the perfect cover, making it appear to be a robbery gone wrong, planting the watch where my brother would find it. Robert was an outsider, a drifter passing through. The perfect scapegoat. "And you," Isaiah said, raising his eyes to meet hers. "You came here for justice for your brother. Not—" He trailed off, but Vivian understood what he wasn't saying. "Not for me. Not because you cared for me or Charlotte." "At first, yes," she admitted, unable to lie to him any longer. "But Isaiah, please believe that what I've come to feel for you and Charlotte is real. It wasn't part of my plan. I never expected to—" She faltered, unsure how to express the complicated emotions that had developed during her time at the ranch. "To what?" He pressed his gray eyes, searching her face. "To care for you both so deeply," she whispered. "To find a home here. To wish more than anything that I had come to you honestly from the beginning." Isaiah held her gaze for a long moment, then looked away, his expression unreadable. "It doesn't matter now," he said flatly. "What matters is stopping Warner before he can move forward with his plans. If what you and Charlotte say is true, if he killed Emma for this land, then he won't hesitate to use any means necessary to get what he wants." Vivian nodded, pushing aside the pain of his dismissal of her feelings. "He's coming tomorrow with the railroad men. They plan to present their proposal formally, but from what they said in town, they're prepared to use legal means, eminent domain, if you refuse to sell willingly." "Let them try," Isaiah said, a dangerous edge to his voice. "But first, we need to deal with Warner himself. If he killed Emma, he needs to face justice." "We need proof," Vivian pointed out. "Emma's journal and the documents she gathered are compelling, but they're circumstantial. And Charlotte's eyewitness account would be dismissed as the testimony of a child. We need Warner to confess, or to find direct evidence linking him to Emma's death." Isaiah was silent for a moment, considering. Then he looked up, determination hardening his features. "When Warner arrives tomorrow, I'll confront him with what we know. Charlotte will be safely away from the ranch. I'll send her to stay with Martha Simmons in town. And you—" He hesitated. "It might be best if you weren't here either." The implication was clear now that her true identity and purpose had been revealed. There was no place for her at the Thornhill Ranch. Despite having anticipated this reaction, Vivian felt the rejection like a physical blow. "I understand," she said quietly, rising from her chair. "I'll pack my things tonight and be gone before Warner arrives tomorrow." Isaiah watched her conflict evident in his expression. "Vivian, or should I call you Harriet now?" "Vivian is fine," she said. "Harriet Foster died along with her brother. I've been Vivian Gray for so long now, it feels more real." He nodded slightly. "Vivian, then, He seemed to struggle for words. "Thank you for bringing this evidence to light, for believing Charlotte when I didn't. Whatever your initial motives, you've done my family a service." It was formal, polite, and utterly devastating in its finality. Vivian nodded, not trusting herself to speak past the lump in her throat. She turned to go to begin the painful process of packing and saying goodbye to the place and people who had, against all odds, become dear to her. "Wait!" Isaiah called as she reached the doorway. She paused, not turning. "Where will you go?" The question contained no invitation to stay, just practical concern for her welfare. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "Back to St. Louis, perhaps, or further east." "You'll need money for the journey," he said, his tone businesslike. I'll have Dawson drive you to town in the morning, and I'll provide enough for your passage." "That's not necessary," Vivian began, but he cut her off. "It is. Whatever else has happened between us, I won't send you away penniless." There was an edge to his voice that brooked no argument. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check on Charlotte and explain what's happening." Vivian nodded again and left the dining room, her steps heavy as she made her way to the kitchen and then to her small room off it. The room that had been her home for these past weeks, where she had planned and schemed and gradually, unwillingly developed feelings for the family whose tragedy had intertwined with her own. She began to gather her few possessions mechanically, her mind numb with grief. She had accomplished what she came to do, discovered the truth about Emma's death, identified her brother's killer. But the victory felt hollow in the face of what she was losing. A soft knock on her door startled her from her melancholy thoughts. She opened it to find Charlotte standing there in her nightgown, tears streaking her small face. "Pa says you're leaving tomorrow," the girl said, her voice wobbling. "That you're not really Miss Gray, but someone else." Vivian knelt to Charlotte's level, her heart breaking anew at the child's distress. "My real name is Vivian Foster," she explained gently. "I came here to find out who really hurt your mother, because my brother was blamed for it unfairly. But I'm still the same person who's been cooking for you and teaching you to bake. That part was real." Charlotte studied her face intently, as though searching for deception. "Do you have to go? Can't you stay and help Pa fight Mr. Warner?" "Your father thinks it's best if I leave," Vivian said carefully, not wanting to place the child in the middle of adult conflicts. "And he's probably right. My presence would complicate things." "But we need you," Charlotte insisted, fresh tears welling in her eyes. "I need you. And Pa does too, even if he's too stubborn to say it." Vivian pulled the girl into a gentle embrace, stroking her wild curls. "Oh, Charlotte, sometimes adults make things so much more complicated than they need to be." "Mama always said that, too," Charlotte mumbled against Vivian's shoulder. "She said Pa was the most hard-headed man in Wyoming territory." Despite everything, Vivian found herself smiling at this description. "Your mother was a very wise woman." Charlotte pulled back, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her nightgown. "Will you at least say goodbye before you go properly, not just leave while I'm in town?" "Of course," Vivian promised. "I wouldn't leave without saying goodbye to you." Somewhat mollified by this assurance, Charlotte allowed herself to be led back to her room and tucked into bed. As Vivian smoothed the blankets around her, the girl caught her hand. "Pa will come around," she said with childish certainty. "He just needs time to think. He always makes the right decision in the end." Vivian wished she shared Charlotte's confidence. "Get some sleep now. Tomorrow will be a busy day for everyone." She returned to her own room and continued packing, though there was little enough to do. Her life at the Thornhill Ranch had been simple, her possessions few. The pocket watch, Robert's pocket watch, Emma's pocket watch, remained on the dining room table where she had left it. It belonged with Isaiah and Charlotte, now a tangible connection to the wife and mother they had lost. As Vivian folded her spare dress and placed it in her valise, she heard footsteps in the kitchen, Isaiah moving about restlessly. For a moment, she considered going to him, trying once more to explain her actions to make him understand that her feelings for him and Charlotte were genuine, despite her initial deception. But what would be the point? His silence on the matter had been eloquent enough. Whatever might have been developing between them was now irreparably damaged by her lies. Better to leave with dignity, to carry the memory of these weeks at the ranch, as a bittersweet reminder of what might have been under different circumstances. She finished her packing, changed into her nightgown, and lay down on the narrow bed, though she held little hope of sleep. Outside her window, the herb garden that had been her first connection to Emma Thornhill lay silvered in moonlight, gradually reclaimed from years of neglect through Vivian's patient care. Another legacy she would leave behind. As she stared at the ceiling, listening to the familiar creaks and sighs of the old house settling for the night, Vivian found herself thinking of Emma not as a victim or a mystery to be solved, but as a woman who had lived and loved in these same rooms, who had created a home here for her husband and daughter, who had fought to protect them even at the cost of her own life. "I found the truth for you, Emma," she thought, a tear sliding down her cheek into her hair. "For you and for Robert. I just wish it hadn't cost me so much in the process." Eventually, exhaustion overcame her turbulent emotions, and Vivian drifted into a restless sleep, her dreams filled with images of Emma's garden, Charlotte's smile, and Isaiah's gray eyes, sometimes cold with anger, sometimes warm with something that might have been love, if only circumstances had been different. She woke at dawn from habit, her body accustomed to rising early to prepare breakfast for the household. For a disoriented moment, everything seemed normal. The familiar sounds of the ranch coming to life, the slant of early sunlight through her small window, the distant lowing of cattle. Then memory flooded back, and with it the knowledge that this was her last morning at the Thornhill Ranch. She would prepare one final breakfast, say her goodbyes to Charlotte, and then Dawson would drive her to town, away from the confrontation with Warner and away from the people who had come to mean so much to her. Vivian dressed quickly in her traveling clothes, a simple navy blue dress with a matching jacket that had seen better days. She pinned her hair in a neat bun and surveyed herself in the small mirror above her washstand. The woman who looked back at her seemed older somehow, marked by experiences both painful and precious. Not the same person who had arrived at the ranch weeks ago, driven by a single-minded quest for justice. She had found justice, or at least the path to it. But she had found other things, too, a sense of belonging, of purpose, beyond vengeance of love in its many forms. And now she would have to leave it all behind. With a deep breath to steady herself, Vivian picked up her valise and stepped into the kitchen to begin breakfast preparations one last time. To her surprise, Isaiah was already there, fully dressed, despite the early hours standing at the stove, where coffee bubbled in the percolator. He turned at the sound of her entrance, his expression grave, but no longer angry. "Good morning," he said formally. "I thought you might appreciate coffee before you leave." "Thank you," Vivian replied, equally formal, setting her valise by the door. "I was going to prepare breakfast for you and Charlotte before I go." Isaiah shook his head. "That won't be necessary. I've already arranged for Charlotte to go to town with Dawson. She's getting dressed now." He poured coffee into 2 mugs and handed one to Vivian. "We need to talk before they come down." Vivian accepted the coffee, noting the shadows beneath Isaiah's eyes that suggested he had slept no better than she had. "Of course." He gestured for her to sit at the kitchen table, taking the seat across from her. For a moment, he simply stared into his coffee, gathering his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled. "I spent most of the night thinking about everything you told me. About Emma's journal, about the evidence she gathered against Warner, about Charlotte's eyewitness account." He looked up, meeting Vivian's gaze directly. "And about you, and why you came here." Vivian waited, sensing he had more to say. "I was angry," he continued. "Angry that you had deceived me, that you had come into my home under false pretenses. Angry that you had encouraged Charlotte's theories about her mother's death, when I had spent years trying to help her accept it as a tragic but random act of violence." He took a deep breath, but as I thought about it more, I realized something. You did what any loving sister would do for her brother. what I would have done for Emma if our situations were reversed. The unexpected understanding in his words caught Vivian off guard. "I never meant to hurt you or Charlotte," she said softly. "I came seeking answers, but I found so much more than I expected. A child who needed mothering, a garden that needed tending, a home that needed healing." Isaiah's expression softened slightly. "You brought life back to this house," he admitted. "Before you came, Charlotte and I were just existing, going through the motions. You reminded us what it was to live." He paused, his gray eyes holding hers. "That's why I've changed my mind about you leaving." Hope flared in Vivian's chest, though she tried to temper it. "What do you mean, I want you to stay?" Isaiah said simply. "Not just for today to help with Warner, but beyond that, if you're willing." Vivian's breath caught in her throat. "Isaiah, are you sure? After everything I've told you, everything you know about me now. I know that you're brave, resourceful, and fiercely loyal to those you love," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I know that you've brought joy back into my daughter's life. And I know that the thought of you leaving—" He swallowed hard. "It feels like losing part of myself all over again." Tears sprang to Vivian's eyes at this unexpected declaration. "I don't want to leave," she whispered. "I've come to care for you both so much, more than I ever thought possible." Isaiah's fingers tightened around hers. "Then stay. Help me confront Warner, bring him to justice for what he did to Emma. And afterward—" He hesitated, vulnerability clear in his gaze. "Afterward, we can see where this leads. No more secrets between us, no more lies. Just two people who have found each other through the most unlikely of circumstances." Before Vivian could respond, the sound of running footsteps on the stairs announced Charlotte's approach. The girl burst into the kitchen, already dressed for her trip to town, but stopped short at the sight of Vivian and Isaiah holding hands across the table. "Does this mean you're not leaving?" she asked Vivian, hope brightening her features. Vivian looked to Isaiah, who nodded almost imperceptibly, then back to Charlotte. "If you'll have me, I'd like to stay," she said softly. Charlotte's whoop of delight echoed through the kitchen as she launched herself at Vivian, nearly knocking her from her chair with the force of her embrace. "I knew Pa would come to his senses. I told you he always makes the right decision in the end." Isaiah chuckled, the sound warming Vivian's heart. "I'm glad you have such faith in my judgment, Charlie." The girl pulled back from Vivian, her expression suddenly serious. "But what about Mr. Warner? He's coming today with those railroad men." "That's why you're still going to town with Dawson," Isaiah explained, his tone brooking no argument. "Vivian and I will handle Warner. I don't want you anywhere near him until this is resolved." Charlotte looked like she might protest, but Vivian interjected gently, "Your father's right, Charlotte. The confrontation with Mr. Warner could be unpleasant, and we'll both feel better knowing you're safe with Mrs. Simmons." The girl considered this, then nodded reluctantly. "All right, but you have to promise to tell me everything that happens, and you have to be careful. Mr. Warner is dangerous." "We know," Isaiah assured her, rising from the table as Dawson's knock sounded at the back door. "That's why we're going to be very smart about how we handle him. Now get your things. Dawson's here to take you to town." While Isaiah spoke with Dawson in the yard, giving him instructions for Charlotte's care, Vivian helped the girl gather what she would need for a day away from home. Charlotte remained subdued, clearly worried about what would happen in her absence. "Mama will help you," she said suddenly as Vivian buttoned her coat. "She's been waiting for this day for a long time." The childish certainty in her voice sent a shiver down Vivian's spine. Your mother would be very proud of you, she said, smoothing Charlotte's wild curls, for remembering what you saw, for being brave enough to tell the truth, even when adults didn't believe you. Charlotte hugged her fiercely. Be careful, she whispered. Come get me as soon as it's safe. We will, Vivian promised, walking her out to where Dawson waited with the wagon. After one final embrace and a kiss on the forehead from her father, Charlotte climbed up beside Dawson, her small face solemn with the gravity of the day's events. They watched the wagon until it disappeared down the road toward town, then turned to face each other in the clear morning light. What's your plan for Warner? Vivian asked, noting the determined set of Isaiah's jaw. I'm going to confront him with what we know, he replied, leading her back toward the house. The journal, the documents, Charlotte's eyewitness account. I want to see his face when he realizes we've uncovered his scheme. And the railroad men, they'll be with him. Isaiah's expression hardened. Let them come. They should hear what kind of man they're doing business with. A man who would murder a woman to get what he wanted. Vivian followed him into the house, her mind racing with the implications of this direct approach. Warner won't confess easily, she cautioned. He's had 3 years to perfect his story to cover his tracks, and he's a respected businessman with powerful connections. I know, Isaiah acknowledged, pacing the length of the kitchen. That's why we need to be strategic, to trap him in his own lies. They spent the next hour planning their approach, gathering Emma's journal and the documents from her hiding place, deciding where and how to confront Warner. Isaiah sent the ranch hands on distant errands, ensuring that he and Vivian would be alone when Warner and the railroad men arrived. As the appointed hour approached, they took their positions in the formal parlor, a room rarely used but impressive with its leather furnishings and family heirlooms. Isaiah sat behind his father's massive oak desk, a position of authority, while Vivian arranged herself in a chair by the window, where she could observe without being immediately noticed. The sound of approaching horses announced Warner's arrival. Through the window, Vivian watched as 4 men dismounted Warner and the 3 railroad executives she had met in town. They moved with the confidence of men accustomed to getting their way, Warner leading them up the porch steps with a proprietary air that made Vivian's blood boil. The knock, when it came, was firm, authoritative. Isaiah caught Vivian's eye, a silent confirmation of their plan, then called, "Enter." Warner opened the door, his practiced smile faltering slightly at the unexpected sight of Isaiah seated formally behind the desk in the parlor rather than greeting them at the door as a proper host. Isaiah, he recovered quickly. Thank you for receiving us on such short notice. As I mentioned to your cook, yesterday we have a proposition that I believe will interest you greatly. He ushered in the 3 railroad men, making introductions as though he were the host rather than Isaiah. Only when they were all inside did he notice Vivian seated by the window. His smile tightened. Miss Gray, I didn't realize you would be joining us for this business discussion. Miss Gray is here at my request, Isaiah said coolly. She has insights that might be relevant to our conversation. Warner's eyes narrowed slightly, but he maintained his cordial facade. Of course, whatever makes you comfortable. He gestured to the railroad executives. These gentlemen have traveled quite a distance to discuss the Eastern Central's expansion plans with you, plans that could be very lucrative for all involved. So I understand, Isaiah replied, his tone neutral. Please, take a seat, gentlemen. You too, Warner. Something in Isaiah's manner, perhaps the unusual formality or the underlying tension in his voice, caused Warner to hesitate. But with the railroad men watching, he had little choice but to comply. They arranged themselves in chairs facing the desk, with Warner slightly to the side, still standing. Before we begin discussing your proposal, Isaiah said, his gaze fixed on Warner, there's a matter of long-standing business between us that needs to be addressed." Warner frowned. "I'm not aware of any unfinished business, Isaiah, and these gentlemen have a tight schedule." "It concerns my wife," Isaiah interrupted, his voice hardening, "and her death 3 years ago." The parlor fell silent. The railroad executives exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly unprepared for this turn in the conversation. Warner's face remained carefully neutral, though Vivian, watching closely, noticed a slight tensing of his shoulders. "Emma's death was a tragedy," Warner said smoothly. "One that affected us all deeply. But I fail to see what relevance it has to today's discussion." "The relevance," Isaiah replied, opening a folder on the desk before him, "is that I recently discovered some interesting documents that my wife had collected before her death. Documents concerning your land acquisitions over the past 6 years. Warner, specifically properties forming a corridor from the existing railroad line to the boundary of my ranch." Warner's composure slipped for just an instant, a fleeting widening of the eyes, a quick twitch of his mouth before he regained control. "I've made no secret of my investments in local properties, Isaiah. It's called business foresight." "Is that what you call it?" Isaiah withdrew several papers from the folder copies of the documents found in Emma's hiding place. "Because Emma called it something else. Coercion, intimidation, fraud." He laid the papers on the desk where Warner could see them. "She documented your methods quite thoroughly. The mysterious accidents that befell property owners who refused to sell. The shell companies you used to hide your involvement. The below-market prices you paid for land that would be worth a fortune once the railroad came through." The railroad executive named Hamilton leaned forward, frowning. "What is this about Warner? You assured us all land acquisitions were conducted legally and ethically." Warner's smile had turned brittle. "They were. Isaiah is clearly confused, mixing up legitimate business transactions with some conspiracy theory." He turned to Isaiah, his voice hardening. "I don't know where you got these documents, but they prove nothing. And bringing up your wife's death as some kind of emotional leverage is beneath you." "I'm not using Emma's death as leverage," Isaiah said quietly. "I'm accusing you of causing it." The blunt statement landed like a physical blow. Warner actually took a step back, his face draining of color. That's absurd," he sputtered. "Emma was killed by a drifter, Foster. He was tried and hanged." "Robert Foster was innocent," Vivian spoke up for the first time, rising from her chair by the window. "He found Emma's watch near the creek and was arrested before he could turn it in. He became your convenient scapegoat." Warner's gaze snapped to her recognition dawning in his eyes. "You're not just a cook," he said slowly. "Who are you really?" "My name is Vivian Foster," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Robert was my brother. I came to Creswell to find the truth about his death, and I found it in Emma's journal, in the evidence she gathered against you, and in the testimony of a child who saw you threatening Emma the day before she died." "This is preposterous," Warner declared, though his voice lacked conviction. He turned to the railroad executives. "Gentlemen, I apologize for this theatrical display. Clearly, Mr. Thornhill is not interested in discussing business today. Perhaps we should reschedule." "Not so fast, Warner," Isaiah interjected, rising from behind the desk. "You're not leaving until we finish this conversation." And he withdrew Emma's journal from the desk drawer and opened it to a marked page. "Emma wrote that she discovered your plan for the railroad, that she had evidence of your illegal methods, and that she intended to go to the sheriff. The day after she wrote this entry, she was found dead by the creek, her skull crushed, her watch missing." "And you think that proves I killed her?" Warner scoffed, though sweat had begun to bead on his forehead. "Anyone could have killed Emma for her watch. Foster's guilt was established in a court of law. "My daughter saw you," Isaiah said, his voice deadly quiet. "Charlotte was playing in the garden the day before Emma died. She witnessed your argument with my wife, heard you threaten her when she said she was going to expose your scheme. The imagination of a child." Warner dismissed, but his eyes darted nervously toward the door, calculating escape routes. No court would accept such testimony. "Perhaps not," Isaiah acknowledged. But combined with Emma's journal, the evidence she gathered, and this, he withdrew the gold pocket watch from his pocket, found not on Robert Foster's person as you testified at his trial, but hidden among his belongings after his execution, preserved by his sister, who believed in his innocence, it builds a compelling case. The railroad men had risen during this exchange, their expressions ranging from confusion to outright alarm. "I think we should leave," Hamilton announced, edging toward the door. "This is clearly a personal matter between you gentlemen, and we want no part in it." "I disagree," Isaiah said firmly. "You gentlemen should hear exactly what kind of man you're doing business with. A man who would murder a woman, a wife and mother, for a piece of land. A man who would let an innocent drifter hang for his crime." Warner's composure cracked entirely at this. "You have no proof," he shouted, his face flushed with anger or fear or both. "None that would stand up in court. It's your word against mine, and I'm a respected businessman while you're just a rancher still grieving his dead wife, seeing conspiracies where there are none." "Perhaps," said a new voice from the doorway, "but your word won't count for much once the sheriff hears what I have to say." All heads turned to see Sheriff Hudson standing in the parlor entrance, his badge gleaming on his chest, his expression grim. Behind him stood Charlotte, her small face set in determined lines. "Charlie!" Isaiah exclaimed, half relieved, half angry. "You were supposed to stay in town with Mrs. Simmons." "I know, Pa," the girl replied, not looking particularly repentant. "But I remembered something important, something I hadn't told anyone before." She looked at the sheriff. "Tell them what I told you, Sheriff Hudson." The lawman stepped further into the room, his hand resting meaningfully on the pistol at his hip. "Charlotte came to my office this morning with a very interesting story," he said, his gaze fixed on Warner. "She said that 3 years ago, on the day her mother died, she saw you, Silas, returning from the direction of the creek with blood on your hands and sleeve. She was too frightened to tell anyone at the time, and later when she tried, no one believed her." Warner's face had gone the color of old parchment. "The fantasies of a child," he insisted, but his voice had lost its conviction. "Surely you're not taking the word of a 7-year-old over mine." "She was 4 then," the sheriff corrected, "but old enough to know what she saw, and her description of your blood-stained jacket matched what my deputy and I observed when we came to inform you of Emma's death, a fresh stain on your right cuff that you claimed came from a nosebleed." Isaiah stared at his daughter, a mixture of emotions crossing his face: pride, pain, regret. "Why didn't you tell me this before, Charlie?" The girl's lower lip trembled slightly. "I tried, Pa, right after it happened. But you were so sad, and you kept saying I was confused about things. And then later I was scared. Mr. Warner told me that if I ever told anyone what I saw, he would hurt you too." Warner's eyes darted wildly around the room, seeking escape, finding none. The railroad executives had backed away from him, their expressions now openly hostile. "This is absurd," he tried one last time. "You can't possibly believe—" "We found the jacket, Silas," Sheriff Hudson interrupted. "The one Charlotte described, hidden in your attic, still stained with what I'm betting will prove to be Emma Thornhill's blood. Your housekeeper was quite cooperative once I explained the situation." Something in Warner seemed to collapse then. His shoulders sagged, the bluster drained from him, leaving behind a smaller, diminished figure. She was going to ruin everything. he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Years of planning, of careful acquisitions. The railroad was finally ready to commit to the spur line, and she was going to expose me, destroy my reputation, my business. I just wanted to talk to her, to reason with her. His gaze turned inward, reliving the moment. But she wouldn't listen. Said she had evidence that she was going to the sheriff that very day. I didn't mean to hit her so hard, just to frighten her, to make her see reason. But there was a rock in my hand before I knew it, and then she was on the ground, and there was so much blood. The confession hung in the air, stunning in its casualness, its lack of remorse. Isaiah took a step toward Warner, his face contorted with rage, but Vivian moved swiftly to his side, placing a restraining hand on his arm. "No," she said softly. "Let the law handle him now. For Emma, for Robert, for Charlotte." The fight seemed to go out of Isaiah at her touch. He nodded once, his jaw clenched tight with suppressed emotion. Sheriff Hudson moved forward, handcuffs ready. "Silas Warner, you're under arrest for the murder of Emma Thornhill," he announced formally. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." As the sheriff led Warner away, the banker seemed to shrink, further aging years in minutes. The railroad executives followed, murmuring apologies and assurances that they wanted no further association with Warner or his schemes. When they had gone, silence fell over the parlor. Charlotte ran to her father, who knelt to embrace her fiercely. "I'm so sorry, I didn't believe you," he murmured into her curls. "Can you forgive me?" "Of course, Pa," she replied simply. "You believe me now. That's what matters." Over his daughter's shoulder, Isaiah's gaze found Vivian standing a few feet away, giving them space for their reconciliation. His eyes held a mixture of gratitude, regret, and something deeper, more profound. "And you," he said softly, "can you forgive me for doubting you, for almost sending you away?" Vivian felt tears well in her eyes. "There's nothing to forgive," she replied. "We both did what we believed was right, based on what we knew at the time." Charlotte wiggled free of her father's embrace and took Vivian's hand, pulling her closer to them. "Does this mean you're staying?" she asked, hope bright in her gray eyes. "Now that the bad man is gone and the truth is out?" Vivian looked to Isaiah, unwilling to presume. "That depends on your father," she said carefully. "My reason for coming here is resolved. Robert's name will be cleared, but whether there's still a place for me at the Thornhill Ranch—" Isaiah rose to his feet, closing the distance between them. He took her hands in his touch gentle but sure. "There will always be a place for you here," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "If you want it, not as our cook, but as something more. If you're willing to give us time to figure out exactly what that might be." "I'd like that," Vivian whispered, her heart full to bursting. "Very much." Charlotte looked between them, satisfaction written clearly on her small face. "I told you Mama would help," she said triumphantly. "She wanted us to be happy again. All of us. And perhaps it was just a trick of the light through the parlor windows, or perhaps it was something more, but for a moment Vivian could have sworn she felt a presence in the room with them, warm, approving, at peace. The ghost of Emma Thornhill, or just the lasting impact of a life well lived. A love that had created this family, this home. It didn't really matter. What mattered was the future stretching before them, built on truth, finally revealed, on justice, long deferred, but finally delivered. A future where a woman who had come seeking vengeance had found healing instead. Where a man locked in grief had learned to open his heart again. Where a child who spoke to ghosts would no longer need to, because the living would be enough. As the afternoon sun slanted through the parlor windows, bathing the three of them in golden light, Vivian knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place at last. Not the neat resolution she had sought when she stepped off the stagecoach with Robert's watch and a heart full of righteous anger, but something far more precious, a second chance at family, at belonging, at love. Emma's garden would continue to flourish under her care. Charlotte would grow up knowing both her mothers, one in memory honored and true, and one in life present and loving. And Isaiah would learn to laugh again, to live fully in the present while honoring the past. They had all been broken in different ways by the same tragedy. Now, together, they would heal. What happens next? Charlotte asked, practical as always, despite the emotion of the moment. Isaiah squeezed Vivian's hand gently before releasing it. "Next we have supper," he said, his voice lighter than it had been in years. "And tomorrow we begin again." It was as simple and as profound as that. One meal, one day, one step at a time toward whatever future awaited them. As they walked together toward the kitchen, Vivian felt the weight of the past lifting from her shoulders. Robert had been vindicated. Emma would have justice. And in this house, once shadowed by secrets and sorrow, light had finally returned. Trust, once broken, had been rebuilt on the Wyoming prairie, as strong and enduring as the land itself.